Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
3 till 6. Here's what's on the menu this hour. So, the Albanian PM's in town and he's absolutely slammed Suella Braverman, saying that her comments are disgraceful, borderline criminal. Ironically, it's about her comments relating to Albanian criminals crossing the channel. We'll delve into all of that. And yes, what does this mean for the money in your pocket? We are going to be talking about more mortgage misery, but I want to know whether you're a home buyer or a homeowner, or just anyone really. What do you make of the interest rates hike? And in other news, we are, of course, as well going to be talking about the fact that teachers are protesting today against Ofsted, against the way their schools are graded. They say it's wrong and could, and indeed maybe has, already cost lives. And as well in other news, yes, French protesters have threatened our king and queen, believe it or not. I'll tell you why very, very shortly. All that coming your way and much, much more. Lock yourselves in. Get your emails coming in, ladies and gentlemen. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Do you think the Albanian PM was right to slam Suella Braverman? gbviews@gbnews.uk. He said her comments were disgusting. Anyway, now it's over to your headlines with the wonderful Rihanna.
Thank you, Patrick. It's coming up to 2 minutes past 3, your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Bank of England has raised the interest rate for the 11th time in a row from 4% to 4.25%. It's in a bid to slow down the rising cost of living and comes after a surprise rise in inflation, as well as the decision by the US Federal Reserve to raise its key rate. The central bank's also announced it expects the economy to grow slightly in the second quarter, revising a previous forecast it would contract. The Northern Ireland Secretary has told Stormont leaders there's no negotiating the Windsor framework and it will become law. Chris Heaton-Harris has been holding talks over the Prime Minister's post-Brexit trade deal at Hillsborough Castle. It's after a key element of the EU-UK agreement, known as the Stormont Break, was overwhelmingly passed in the Commons yesterday. DUP leader Sir Geoffrey Donaldson says the Windsor framework is a sticking plaster that won't work.
I don't want to be in a situation where we're back into Stormont and in 18 months' time, because there are flaws in this Windsor framework, that we have another crisis. I want stability in Northern Ireland. I want a devolved government that is sustainable for the future and delivers for everyone in Northern Ireland. So I'm not working to someone's deadline. I'm working to get this right.
The Northern Ireland Secretary Chris Heaton-Harris, meanwhile, says leaders need to come together in order for it to work.
Well, the Windsor Framework's not a sticking plaster. It's a solution to the problems that were produced by the protocol, and it will work. And the two sides to those negotiations which have concluded, the UK government and the European Union, are going to make that the framework work. Now I think it's down to the communities of Northern Ireland to work out how best it can work for them. I think it can work for them really well. I do believe it will herald, alongside the 25th anniversary of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, the next 25 years could be all about prosperity if everybody puts their shoulder to the wheel.
Junior doctors in England will strike for 4 days next month. Members of the British Medical Association will walk off the job between the 11th and 15th of April. It's accusing the government of not being serious about resolving the pay dispute, saying Health Secretary Steve Barclay's failed to make a credible offer. The union says the new round of strikes come with great frustration, but it won't stop until it's paid what it's worth. The UK and Welsh governments have announced 2 free ports will be created in Wales for the first time in a bid to boost the country's economy. The Celtic and Anglesey free ports in North Wales are expected to attract almost £5 billion in investment. It's also hoped they'll generate up to 20,000 jobs by the end of the decade. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak says the free ports will see communities across Wales go from strength to strength.
Billions of pounds of investment, tens of thousands of jobs created across Wales. And it's a great example of the UK government and the Welsh government working together to drive growth. That's one of the 5 priorities I set out at the beginning of the year, to grow the economy. These free ports will help us deliver on that.
The Labour leader has promised to make Britain's streets safe again if his party wins the next general election. Sir Keir Starmer's pledged 4 targets to modernise British policing in England and Wales in the next 10 years. They include halving levels of violence against women and girls and knife crime. It's after the Conservatives accused Labour of being soft on crime. He also announced his party's plan to boost confidence in the police following the damning report into the Met.
Confidence is everything. It's what effective, visible, open-minded policing can provide for the communities that it serves. And as we've seen this week, it's what bad policing destroys. So let me be very clear, the next Labour government will modernise British policing.
Parliament has banned the Chinese-owned social media app TikTok from all government devices. The ban follows security concerns from the House of Commons and Lords, but won't include personal devices. Scotland has followed suit, with its Deputy First Minister saying the ban will be implemented immediately. John Swinney has said the decision to prohibit the use of TikTok on Scottish government phones will help manage privacy risks from third-party sites. A Nigerian politician has been found guilty of an organ harvesting plot involving a British hospital. Senator Ike Ikweramadụ's wife and Ike Ikweramadụ and a doctor were found guilty of conspiring to arrange the travel of a man to exploit him for his kidney. The victim, a 21-year-old street trader, was brought to the UK last year to provide the organ for the senator's daughter for an £80,000 private transplant. The case, heard at the Old Bailey, is a legal first. A 28-year-old man has appeared in court charged with attempted murder after 2 elderly men were set alight outside mosques in Birmingham and London. West Midlands police say Mohammed Abkar allegedly sprayed the 2 victims before setting them alight in separate incidents. 70-year-old Mohammed Rayaz remains in hospital with severe burns to his face, hands and chest following Monday's attack in Birmingham. And Nicola Sturgeon was given a standing ovation as she made a goodbye statement after her final First Minister's questions. After leading the Scottish Government for more than 8 years, she said it's been a profound honour to serve the country. She announced last month she was stepping down, saying she no longer had the stamina to carry on in a pressured and demanding role. The First Minister said she'll remain in office until her successor is chosen.
Being First Minister has been variously, often all at once, challenging, exhilarating and exhausting. But every single day, without exception, it has been an utter privilege.
This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Patrick.
Good afternoon, everybody. Loads to get through today, but we start with the growing problem of Albanian migrants crossing the Channel. Now, Rishi Sunak is holding talks with the Albanian Prime Minister today, Edi Rama, where the migrant crisis will be discussed. And in fact, we're hoping to go live to that in the last hour of this show. So we'll bring you some live shots and indeed some live footage of all of that. And Rama has really stoked the fires ahead of today's meeting by accusing the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, of making disgraceful comments, borderline criminal, actually. Braverman said last year that if Labour were in power, they would allow all the Albanian criminals to come to this country. And now Rama's hit back. He said that her comment was a very, very disgraceful moment for British politics and that a few rotten apples did not define a nation. Well, figures show at least 13,000 Albanians entered Britain on small boats last year, which was just under a third of all arrivals. And it comes as reports predict that as a result of the government's new illegal migration bill, more than 150,000 people will be denied asylum over the next 3 years. But unless we can deport them, it will end up costing us around £9 billion. The Refugee Council has estimated this could cost us that figure, again, £9 billion. If they cannot be removed. Joining me now is the Refugee and Migrant Rights Programme Director at Amnesty International. It is Steve Valdez-Simmons. Steve, thank you very much. First things first, then. Do you think that Suella Braverman's comment about Albanian criminals crossing the Channel was disgraceful?
I think government ministers have been shockingly demonising, particularly of Albanian nationals, and suggesting that by being Albanian in some way makes someone a criminal or dangerous or threatening. And I know full well that many of the people who cross the Channel, including people who are Albanian, are not threatening or dangerous and may have good asylum claims to be dealt with if the government would simply put their minds to that.
Is it not a bit tricky for the Albanian Prime Minister, though? Because he has to say, well, our country is safe and nice, but at the same time, presumably, he also wants to say that people who are coming over are genuine and nice people. How does he square that?
Well, I can't speak for his difficulties, as you put it. I'm sure he does want to promote his country as a, as you put it, safe and nice place. The reality is that whatever the intentions of successive Albanian governments, it is an extremely poor country that has largely been left behind in Europe over many, many years. And governments have struggled there to control, particularly the exploitation of many Albanian nationals, many of whom have been trafficked to this country.
When I read articles that say that Albanian criminals in British prisons are costing the taxpayer around £57 million a year, that the National Crime Agency is saying it's seeing increased Albanian crime gangs, many of them relating to cannabis and cocaine, etc. I mean, Suella Braverman is right to raise the issue of Albanian criminals coming to this country, isn't she?
Well, she would be far better placed raising the issues of certainly Albanian criminal networks engaged in trafficking and smuggling gangs, along with British and other people, for that matter, who exploit the people who cross the Channel. But she doesn't do that. She likes to criticise the people who cross the Channel, most of whom are highly exploited people, rather than addressing the realities of their exploitation and the criminal gangs that control that.
And when it comes to the idea now that we are set to deny asylum to around 150,000 people over the next 3 years, and if we can't deport those people, it will cost us around £9 billion. in the next 3 years. Where do you stand on that?
Well, I'm aware of the Refugee Council's report, and it's an extrapolation of current figures and predictions. It's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. It's a bit shameful, frankly, that the government hasn't produced any impact assessment itself on the consequences of its current legislation. I actually fear that the Refugee Council may be missing the bigger cost, socially, financially, and human, of what is proposed. Because the government is trying to terrify people from ever coming forward and being in touch with the authorities in this country. If that happens, what we will have is a huge underclass of people in this country, too terrified to ever make themselves known, let alone make the abuses that they suffer known, and easily exploited by exploitation here, as well as on the journeys before they arrive.
When we have the government saying that a lot of these people who are claiming modern slavery, it's not genuine, they're hiding behind existing laws, and we also have a lot of the legal profession admitting it as well. They differ about what we should do about that, whether we should change the law, etc. But there doesn't actually appear to be too much of a dispute, other than, frankly, from people like yourself, that people are exploiting the laws, that they're not actually, in any kind of large numbers at all, victims of modern slavery. I mean, aren't they just using a legal loophole in order to be able to say that they are, which allows you to pump out figures to say, oh, look, these people are all victims of modern slavery, when anyone with eyes and ears can see and hear that they're not?
Well, just to be clear, Amnesty doesn't pump out figures about modern slavery. The source of figures about modern slavery come from government bodies, and they tell us that 90% of the people who are referred to the system the government has established are indeed victims of modern slavery. It's quite clear there's not abuse of the system. Even the former Home Secretary and Prime Minister, Theresa May, got up in Parliament to put the government to the spot on this nonsense.
No,
and
they were being specific about people who were either already here.
So no, it's not the legal profession and others saying this.
They weren't talking about the Albanian issue, Steve, were they? Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but they weren't talking about the Albanian issue, were they, Steve? They were talking about younger women who were involved in the sex trade, for example, and people who were maybe already in this country as well from different households who are victims of it. But, I mean, are you denying that there is a problem with Albanian criminals coming across the channel?
I am not denying that there is a huge problem with control of trafficking and people smuggling by criminal gangs, including gangs of Albanians. But that is not the people who are in the boats. And just to be clear, the data that I gave you, the government data I gave you about modern slavery laws, includes the Albanians who have been trafficked to this country. It's not a national free or a nationality free data set. It is just the figures on the total number of people who are put forward, identified as victims of modern slavery, and the vast majority of them are found to be exactly that, victims.
OK, look, Steve, thank you very, very much for putting your side of it across. It's Steve Valdez-Simmons there, who is the Refugee and Migrant Rights Programme Director at Amnesty International. Now, look, ladies and gentlemen, we've had a slight change to the running order now because I believe there is a bit of breaking news for us, and TikTok has been banned from official government phones after a security review. Cabinet Office Minister Oliver Dowden announced the move, which he said would be good cyber hygiene amid a risk to sensitive government data with immediate effect. Presumably, this is bad news for Grant Shapps. Ministers and officials will still be able to use the Chinese-owned app on their personal phone, so maybe not. Our political reporter, Olivia Utley, has hot-footed it into the studio. Olivia, what's going on with TikTok?
Well, yes, so this is against a backdrop of the CEO of TikTok being grilled by US congressmen over his links with China and, most importantly, whether or not TikTok is able to access military phones in the US and gather data from those phones, which would obviously make TikTok essentially a giant spying device for the Chinese. And the congressmen in the US, I've been following it, and they aren't letting up on their questioning of the CEO. He claims he's sort of fudging quite a few questions. He says that the parent company of TikTok isn't actually Chinese-owned and that he has had, but there are very strong links, and that he personally hasn't had any conversations with Chinese officials since taking up the job. But China, the CCP, clearly believes that TikTok is very much associated with China. On the question of whether the TikTok could access military phones and access that data, he said he'd have to look into the technicalities. So presumably the same rules apply for parliamentary phones in the UK, which is why the parliamentary authorities have made this decision, essentially to block the Wi-Fi, block the connection to TikTok on the parliamentary estate.
Wow, OK, all right. Well, there we go. Thank you very much, Olivia. We'll have a bit more on that as we get it. Olivia Rutley there, our political reporter. Right, now, so the money in your pocket, does it feel lighter or heavier at the moment? Because the pound has moved higher after the Bank of England's decision at midday to raise interest rates by 0.25%. And Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has said he supports the Bank of England's decision, saying it will help get a grip on inflation. Back just now from the Bank of England, actually, is our business and economics editor. It's Liam Halligan with On the Money. OK, Liam, is this as bad as it sounds?
It could have been a lot worse, Patrick. Interest rates are now the highest that they've been since 2008. We have had 11 successive rises in interest rates, 11 increases in 18 months. And we've moved from 4 to 4.25%, but it could have gone up to 4.5%. This increase will add about £350 a year to the mortgage payment bill of a family with a £200,000 home loan. So obviously quite a lot of people have got mortgages quite a bit bigger than that, given how expensive houses are to buy, particularly younger people. So this is a blow. On the other hand, I do think this is the last interest rate rise we're going to see now for some time. OK, all right. So are there any winners in this? Well, there are winners in this in the sense that if you've got savings, if you're lucky enough to have savings, they should get more interest at the bank. Banks aren't always very good, high street banks, at passing on the interest rate rises from the Bank of England, but they certainly should, and you should be onto your bank looking for your extra interest on your savings if you've got those savings. I also think it is now pretty clear, even though we saw inflation go up in February from 10.1 to 10.4%, very, very high inflation, I think it's pretty clear now that inflation is going to come down. The Bank of England certainly thinks that. The Bank of England's estimate of where inflation will be at the end of the year has gone down in the last few months. They're looking at 4-5% by the end of the year, which is still quite high historically, but half of what it currently is. So I think that is good news. What I also think is good news is that the Bank of England is a lot less gloomy than it was. Its economic forecasts now are pointing to some growth this year. It previously thought the economy would shrink this year. And these may sound kind of inane, these forecasts by, people with spreadsheets and behind closed doors. But business leaders look at these forecasts, investors look at these forecasts. These forecasts and others like them will determine maybe if your employer is going to expand, take on more people, whether or not they can afford a better pay rise for you or members of your family. So these kind of official economic forecasts do really matter. And there's absolutely no doubt, amidst the doom and gloom, amidst this interest rate rise, which I do think will be the final one, the forecasts are getting better. The forecasts around Jeremy Hunt's budget just recently, far, far better than they were just in November. The forecast from the Bank of England today, far, far better than the Bank of England just a couple of months ago. So forecasts aren't destiny, but I do think the green shoots of the economy are now there for everyone to see. The important thing is that the government doesn't trample on them.
Right. How could they trample on them?
In my view, that's a contentious issue, but as my personal view, by keeping raising taxes. I don't think taxation is good. High taxation is good. I personally think, I've said it many times, the rise in corporation tax from 19 to 25%, the headline rate, was a mistake. And the tax burden overall, as a share of our economy, is the highest it's been now since Clement Attlee, just after the Second World War. I don't think that's particularly good for the British economy. So I personally hope that taxes soon come down and that will help to boost the growth.
Good stuff, Liam. Thank you very much. As ever, Liam Halligan there, our economics and business editor with On the Money. So, just when we might have thought that strike season was winding down, junior doctors have announced that they will walk out for 96 hours next month. Recent pay talks have failed to reach a resolution. The BMA stated that governments have not made any credible offer and that they will not stop until they are paid what they are worth. They're demanding... So just sit down, ladies and gentlemen, if you're, of a weak disposition or anything, just take a little seat now. They are demanding a 35% pay rise. Yes, the government have called their demands unreasonable. Joining me now is the Sunday Express Health and Social Affairs editor, Lucy Johnson. Lucy, what would happen if you went on strike wanting a 35% pay rise?
I probably wouldn't even dream of asking for it. I don't think I haven't had a pay rise in a long time, if ever. But they have gone in hard and quite aggressively. They're doing it over 4 days. They're not ruling out children's wards, maternity wards, and ICU and A&E wards. So there is a concern that patients' lives will be put at risk. And in fact, the talks collapsed after an hour, I believe, yesterday, because the BMA put a precondition on those talks of this 35%, which the government has said is unrealistic.
Yeah, and I'm just going to add a little bit more details to this. This 96-hour walkout for shifts is apparently going to start between just before 7 a.m. on Tuesday, April the 11th, and just before 7 a.m. on Saturday, the 15th of April. So if you can, try not to get ill in between that period of time. You've mentioned the impact that this might have on patients. Now, I think most people will have balked at the 35% pay rise offer, even if there is room for some wiggle room in there. They've still got a long way to come down before I would imagine the government would say we can afford these demands. Do you think that patients, ordinary members of the public, could be justified for thinking, do I have to die for an unreasonable demand?
I think that in this case, I mean, the nurses have just they're coming towards a deal, aren't they? They've got to vote on that, and that's 5%. And I think they played that quite well. I think there was more sympathy for them. But I think they're not playing their hand very well. It's a strike that's just after Easter, so there's already catch-up needed for the waiting list, the 7.2 million on the waiting list, and they'll have to also have catch-up during that Easter break when there's less people working. So they're actually are potentially putting lives at risk at a time when there will be more slack in the system. And people will have to, I think the number of procedures and operations that were cancelled when they went on strike, the 72-hour strike in mid-March, was about 170,000. So it's not just try not to get ill, but actually this is adding to the waiting lists and making waits busier, GP surgeries busier. It's putting more pressure on a system that's collapsing.
All right, Lucy, thank you very much. Lucy Johnson there, who's Health and Social Affairs Editor at the Sunday Express, just bringing you up to date on what we can expect from a 3-day juniors doctors' strike starting on April the 11th. Now, moving on, the SNP is in turmoil. What's in store now, though, for the party that's seeing its dreams of independence fading by the day? And Scotland, of course, politically at least, waved goodbye earlier on to Nicola Sturgeon. I'm Patrick Christys, and this is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Dubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Yes, welcome back. Now, while Boris Johnson had his Partygate hearing grilling yesterday, the former Prime Minister had one defeat as well. His hopes of leading a major rebellion were dashed as just 22 Tory MPs voted against Rishi Sunak's Brexit deal. Today, Northern Ireland Secretary Chris Heaton-Harris has been discussing the Windsor framework at Hillsborough Castle, and he says that it's time to put the deal to work. Well, I'm very pleased to be able to go to Hillsborough Castle now and join our Northern Ireland reporter, Dougie Beattie. Dougie, great stuff. So, what did the Northern Ireland Secretary have to say then?
Well, it was really the hangover of all political hangovers for the Northern Ireland parties. It was the morning after the night before. All the parties were gathered here, of course, and they were talking about the budget, which Chris Heaton-Harris has to set, because, of course, there's no government in Northern Ireland because unionists do not agree with the protocol. They don't agree with the Windsor framework document either, and they are not going back into the power sharing executive in Northern Ireland until that is looked at, because of course they say that this now locks them out of the UK and locks them very much into EU laws. In fact, most of the KCs that have looked at it would pretty much say exactly the same thing. So anyway, Jeffrey Donaldson came to the mics after having his talk with Chris Heaton-Harris, and he had a different opinion from the rest of the parties that came in. Just listen to what he had to say.
Well, we've had a very constructive discussion with the Secretary of State. We talked about the current political situation, obviously, and the ongoing work on the Windsor framework. We are continuing to engage with the government on this. We've made clear that what is there at the moment is insufficient, and we need to do more work, whether that's clarification around how some of this will work, but fundamentally reworking and change where it is needed, so that we get to a place where arrangements respect Northern Ireland's place within the United Kingdom and its internal market. And of course, we also talked to the Secretary of State about the forthcoming budget for the new financial year.
Well, you can see from that that Jeffrey Donaldson had a different opinion, because Chris Heaton-Harris, the Secretary of State, was very buoyant, very reassured as he came out with that massive majority in the House yesterday. He came to the microphones, and to hear him, you wouldn't think that the two men were in the same room. And here's what he had to say.
Just been having conversations with the party leaders and representatives of political parties here in the lovely Hillsborough Castle. The things we've been talking about, I've been talking about the Windsor framework, how a deal that everybody said could not be done between the UK government and the European Union has been done to solve all the practical and many other issues that were caused by the Northern Ireland Protocol of the past, and that deal is done. And that deal is going to be accepted at a joint committee meeting tomorrow and will become international law shortly afterwards. There is no renegotiating of that deal. We are now going to put our best efforts into making that deal work. That's both us and the...
Well, you can see from Chris Heaton-Harris's thoughts there that, of course, he's saying that they're going to push ahead with this. They don't really care. It's going to become international law. That will be interesting to see what happens there. It could put Northern Ireland into a very awkward position. It could actually bring down the Good Friday Agreement. And, of course, that's what it's all really about. Joe Biden wants to come here. He wants to visit here. He wants to do the thunder run to say this is 25 years since the Good Friday Agreement. And, of course, there's nothing here with the Good Friday Agreement. But what does it mean to Northern Ireland, Patrick? Well, just in the last while or two, a case of BSE has actually been atypical BSE, it must be said, was found in Brazil. China has stopped all that meat going in. So we're talking about the price of groceries going up. 40% of their beef comes from Brazil. An awful lot of our beef and Europe's beef also comes from Brazil. So if we were part of the EU, would we be stopped bringing in that meat, or are we still part of the UK? That sort of legislation that's hanging in there, these are questions that aren't being asked or aren't being answered, and this is why the DUP wanted the extra time to know that, because that could have a massive price hike on our groceries even further than they are now.
Absolutely. Dougie, thank you very, very much. Dougie Beattie there, our Northern Ireland reporter, whizzing you through yesterday's vote, of course, and what it means going forward. There was some big political news yesterday, other than Boris Johnson getting grilled. How did you think he did with that, by the way? I don't think anyone's minds were changed, were they? If you liked Boris, you probably still did and thought it was a kangaroo court. If you thought Boris Johnson was a liar to begin with, I think you probably still did. I'm not sure him swearing on the Bible did much to dissuade people there, did they? Get your views coming in there, gbviews at gbnews.uk, as indeed Class has on the big one that we're going in with today, which is, frankly, the Albanian PM has absolutely slammed Suella Braverman for saying that Albanian criminals are coming across the channel. He said that was disgraceful. And Class just says, look, if Sweden can say no, then why can't we? Keep your views coming in, gbviews at gbnews.uk, ahead of that big press conference between Sunak and the Albanian PM later on. But in other news, Nicola Sturgeon getting ready to step down as SNP leader. I will look back on a terrible few months for the SNP, and the French are revolting. No, not like that. It's all kicking off in Paris, though, ahead of King Charles's visit to France this weekend, and supposedly as well, King Charles has been threatened. But right now, it's your headlines with Rhiannon Jones.
Patrick, thank you. It's 3:34, your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Bank of England's raised the interest rate for an 11th consecutive time from 4% to 4.25%. It's in a bid to slow down the rising cost of living and comes after a surprise rise in inflation, as well as a decision by the US Federal Reserve to raise its key rate. The central bank's also announced it expects the economy to grow slightly in the second quarter, revising a previous forecast it would contract. The Northern Ireland Secretary has told Stormont leaders there's no negotiating the Windsor framework and it will become law. Chris Heaton-Harris has been holding talks over the Prime Minister's post-Brexit trade deal at Hillsborough Castle. It's after a key element of the EU-UK agreement, known as the Stormont Break, was overwhelmingly passed in the Commons yesterday. DUP leader Sir Geoffrey Donaldson says the Windsor framework's a sticking plaster that won't work. Parliament has banned the Chinese-owned social media app TikTok from all government devices. It follows security concerns from the House of Commons and Lords, but won't include personal devices. Scotland has followed suit, with its Deputy First Minister saying the ban will be implemented immediately. The decision comes as TikTok's chief executive faces questions at the US Congress over data security and user safety. And junior doctors in England will strike for 4 days between April the 11th and 15th. The British Medical Association has accused the government of not being serious about resolving the pay dispute and says the Health Secretary has failed to make a credible offer. Steve Barclay claims the BMA were demanding a 35% pay rise. The union says they won't stop until they're paid what they're worth. TV, DAB digital radio, tune in and online. This is GB News.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I just wanted to bring you up to date with a case that dropped a couple of days ago anyway, and it is fascinating, actually. A 28-year-old man has appeared in court charged with the attempted murder of two elderly men who were set alight in the street after they left mosques in Birmingham and London. So we all remember that story. It did drop a couple of days ago. Well, anyway, a man is now in court charged with the attempted murder of 2 elderly men who were set alight in the street after they left mosques in Birmingham and London. Jack Carson is outside Birmingham Magistrates Court for the latest. Jack, what is the latest, please?
Well, today, Patrick, at Birmingham Magistrates Court, 28-year-old Mohammed Abkar appeared charged with the attempted murder of 2 men. He spoke only to enter his name, address and date of birth, with the defendant originally from Sudan needing an interpreter in court. West Midlands police say he is alleged to have set 2 men on fire in separate incidents, one on an 82-year-old man in London on the 27th of February, and one, of course, on Monday when 70-year-old Mohammed Reyes, who was walking home from Dudley Road Mosque, was set alight on Shenstone Road around 7 o'clock at night. Now, Mr. Reyes remains in hospital. It's understood that he had to have a skin graft operation yesterday after severe burns to his face. And Mr. Abkar was arrested on Dudley Road on Tuesday on suspicion of attempted murder. Yesterday, he was arrested on suspicion of the same offence in relation to that incident on the 27th of February in Ealing in London, when 82-year-old Hashi Adowa also suffered severe burns to his face and arms when he was walking away from an Islamic centre in Ealing. Last night he was charged with both attempted murders and today appeared in Magistrates Court, as I mentioned. He gave no indication of a plea and will remain in custody until the end of September, when the judge said there is an expectation a trial would have already taken place before that custody is up. He's going to appear in front of, for his first hearing at Birmingham Crown Court on the 20th of April in a few weeks' time, but the police are still looking for information, CCTV, video footage, doorbell footage to help them in this investigation.
OK, look, Jack, thank you very much for bringing us the latest on that case. Jack Carson there, GB News' West Midlands reporter. OK, so more than 45,000 teachers have signed a petition demanding that Ofsted is replaced. I will tell you why very, very shortly. I'm Patrick Christys and this is GB News.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr.
Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
OK, welcome back, everybody. Now, the discussion over Ofsted inspections in schools continues, and I want to know what this might mean for your child, your grandchild, etc., about the school that they go to. So the National Education Union has handed over a petition signed by over 45,000 people, calling for the body to be replaced by the government. And in solidarity with the late head teacher Ruth Perry, who sadly took her own life whilst waiting for a negative report. It turned out to be a negative report. Schools are removing logos and references to Ofsted ratings from their website. Now, Christine Cunniff is the head teacher at LVS Ascot, and she joins me now. Look, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. Now, look, I'm very aware of the incredibly sensitive backdrop to this, which sadly a head teacher took her own life, and that, of course, is incredibly regrettable and a terrible, terrible thing. Does that in itself now mean that the way that we grade schools as a whole has to be done differently?
I think that it's not so much the grading, but also the descriptors and the reasons why those grades are there as well. I think there's more of a story to be told, and I think a 2-day snapshot of inspectors coming to schools is not the best way to get an actual description of what a school actually does. OK, all right. And so some people might be looking at this now and wondering whether or not actually some teachers will be saying, well, they don't necessarily just like the scrutiny, they don't like any criticism, and I don't want to say this in a negative way whatsoever, but, you know, is this an opportunity for them to try to hit back at Ofsted? No, I don't think so. I think it's quite genuine. I think, you know, all schools have to be regulated. It's like anything. You have to have an MOT on your car, for example. Yeah. So we have to have that regulation, and safeguarding in particular is the most important thing, because we've got to make sure that schools are safe for our children. But there's got to be a better way of doing it, a more supportive way of doing it. OK, so what happens at the moment, then? Do you just get a knock on the door one day and it's, oh, flipping heck, Ofsted are in the car park, you know, is that how it works? A little bit, you know, get a call on Monday morning and then bang, you're in. Right. And probably everything's been scrutinised from a distance anyway. I know with the independent schools, you know, the reporting inspector will actually be looking at your website, your policies and everything else like that prior to actually coming to school.
So how does it really work, then? Because, you know, certain schools, with respect, in some areas, I mean, an inner-city London comp, well, I would imagine, would have a much more difficult time upholding certain behavioural and educational standards than, with respect, a school in Ascot. So, is it fair?
No, it's not fair. And I think you've got to put it in context for every school that you're with and how difficult it is. Look at recruitment, for example. A lot of schools don't even have specialist teachers in front of the children now. So that, you know, straight away, those schools are at a disadvantage. OK, all right. So how can it be done? Because parents, the flip side to this is the parents, and they... well, and the kids to an extent as well, but the parents would want to know that when they send their kids to a school that they are going to get a proper, good education, and that the teachers and the school will be held to account if they feel as though, well, it's rubbish. Yeah, everyone should be held to account. In any industry, you've got to be held to account, and the parents deserve the best, and so do the children. And I think, you know, if you've got a supportive regime where you're going, and if there are problems, that people actually help with those problems. I mean, as you say, some of the schools got tremendous challenges, not just for recruitment, but also parents being supportive of what the staff are trying to do as well. It's a tremendously difficult job these days.
What do you have to do to get an outstanding Ofsted rating? I'm doing a story later on, actually, about Wales going woke, and I know people dislike that word woke, but, you know, we do cover a lot of things on this show about some rather fruity things being taught to kids that people might regard as being a bit outside the remit of teachers. Do you have to have some kind of woke curriculum in order to get outstanding these days?
No, not necessarily. I mean, I actually saw the programme that you were probably referring to, and I must admit, I was actually quite glad I wasn't on that show, so that I didn't have to comment on that one.
Well, I've dragged you into the gutter now, so welcome.
You certainly have. And I shall keep my views to myself. But I think, you know, you don't have to have a woke curriculum. No, you don't. But, you know, it's not fair when some schools can get outstanding just because they're top of the league tables. Because if you're a selective school, you're taking the very top percentage and having a relatively easy time of it. If you're in inner London and you're a non-selective school and you've got challenges, how can you actually reach that outstanding? But there are outstanding schools.
Can I ask you a question, actually? It's slightly off topic, this, but some parents now are wondering whether or not, and this is the lucky few who can afford it, I know that a lot of independent schools do a huge amount with bursaries, etc., and that is great. So they're not all completely out of reach for people. But those parents who will be looking at this now and thinking, well, I can afford to send my kids to private school, I'm wondering whether or not it's starting to become a disadvantage to their kids, because when universities are looking at what school they've gone to, are they starting to enact some kind of positive discrimination, if you can call it, affirmative action, whatever you call it?
Yeah, but you know what? I think parents want their children to be in a safe environment where they've got access to specialist teachers and the curriculum. I think, you know, the children have still got the same opportunities to go on to university, but I think being at 18, being a well-rounded, confident person with the right tools to get on with the world is the best thing.
Do you think that some independent schools are stigmatised unfairly? Because, I mean, look, I've said this on air before, I went to one, but it was a fantastic independent school. Loads of lads there were on either full or half bursaries, I think about 40%. It didn't really have the feel of an independent school. It was great, because we were kind of, whenever we used to play schools like Eton or whatever at football, we'd stuff them 6-0 and they'd all think we were rough. And then, obviously, all the schools around the local area in Manchester thought we were posh. So it was one of those ones, really. But I know that a lot of parents feel as though they're stigmatised for just wanting their kids to go to a safe school.
Yeah, but I really don't think that's the case. I haven't seen any disadvantage in our school with children wanting to go to the university they want to go to. They get the grades, they deserve to get there. You know, I think our schools will fight to get them there.
Good stuff. All right, look, great stuff. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no,
It's great to have you on the show as well. And talk about a range of stuff there. It was fantastic, wasn't it? Christine Cunliffe there, who is the head teacher at LBS Ascot, who was joining me there. And that was, of course, in relation to Ofsted initially, and we know there's a very tragic backstory to that. But I think at the same time as well, we do have to try to drill down as to whether or not things need to change with Ofsted. There has to be a grading system somehow, doesn't there? But anyway, there we go. Now, moving on. It is truly the end of an era in Scotland. Nicola Sturgeon has made her final speech at Holyrood as First Minister. Sturgeon resigned last month after 8 long years as SNP leader. And it's been a dramatic few months for the party. Ian Blackford, there you go, stood down as their leader in Westminster in December. That's a name I've not heard for at least a few weeks. And last weekend, Sturgeon's husband, Peter Murrow, quit as chief executive following a row over the party's membership numbers. I am joined now by Michael Simmons, who's a data journalist at The Spectator. Michael, you know, I mean, will you be sorry to see the back of Nicola?
I think as a journalist, I will be sorry because she created, you know, lots of stories. But I think as a Scotsman, the country probably needs to enter a new era under a different leader.
OK, now just talk to me a little bit about the state that Sturgeon leaves the SNP in and, dare I say, potentially her own reputation. We alluded to her husband there earlier. There are some ongoing scandals, aren't there?
Yeah, so the SNP is, although it's still incredibly successful electorally, it is in trouble as a party. As you mentioned, they've lost 30,000 members in little over a year because of a mixture of things, people going to Alex Salmond's Alba party or people leaving over this gender reform bill. But then there's also this outstanding police inquiry into £600,000 of member donations that was raised seemingly for a referendum. There hasn't been a referendum, but that money's been spent. So there's some allegations of fraud. There's a few different investigations ongoing into a potential book deal that Sturgeon was involved with. So there's kind of messes that whoever inherits this party, both as leader and as chief executive, when of course her husband is replaced, is going to have to deal with these scandals that have not yet been resolved.
But can I just ask what could happen now with these scandals? Are there inquiries? Are there investigations? Are there police investigations? I mean, what could happen going forward?
So the missing £600,000, there is an active police investigation looking into that. The latest update we've had from Police Scotland is that they're looking at for guidance from the Crown Office, which is the Scottish version of the Crown Prosecution Service, for what to do next. But of course, some people are raising eyebrows at this because the way that the criminal justice system is set up in Scotland, the head of the Crown Office actually sits within Nicola Sturgeon or her successor's cabinet. So there's cries about, is this really an independent investigation? So this will drag on, and eventually they will have to make a decision for the police. Can they charge someone? Is there anyone to charge, or is there no case to answer?
Yes, no, indeed. And what kind of tone did Nicola Sturgeon strike today? Were there any tears?
She did get emotional towards the end of her speech when she said that it had been the privilege of her life to serve Scotland. But throughout First Minister's questions beforehand and the beginnings of her speech, she really was defiant in that she didn't really look back thinking she'd made many mistakes. She was proud of what she's done, and she was that kind of old traditional style of Sturgeon, you know, just bullish, I'm right, I'm right, I'm right.
OK, yes, all right, fine. And how's the leadership race going then? OK, I know they've been eating themselves alive a little bit, haven't they, north of the border?
Yeah, so they've still been taking lumps out of each other. Every time there's a hustings or a debate, Kate Forbes and Humza Yousaf are at each other's throats, and Ash Reagan just kind of seems lucky to be in the room. But that'll come to a conclusion on Monday when they announce the results. At the moment, the polls don't seem to have changed much. It still looks like, for the country as a whole, Kate Forbes would be the favoured candidate. But within the SNP, it looks like Humza is just edging it because of the assistance and the help he's had from the party regime.
No, and also, one of the parts of this that people maybe in England and Wales or wherever don't necessarily quite get their heads around is that if support for the SNP falls, I suspect that the majority of those people who would have voted SNP who were going to vote for someone else will probably vote Labour. And actually, that could be a massive shot in the arm for Keir Starmer's chances of wandering into Downing Street in about 18 months.
You're absolutely right, Patrick. So a lot of the SNP's support came from traditional Labour voters, because Labour used to be the Scottish monolith that everyone just voted Labour for years and years and years. And then those voters went to the SNP. If some of those voters now think that independence is off the table, they'll lose their motivation to vote SNP. And if they go back to Labour in big enough numbers, that could be a huge boost for Starmer. Beforehand, it was looking like he would have to win an election without Scottish votes, but now he could, pick up 15, maybe 20 Scottish seats, and that could make a huge difference to the general election.
All right, Michael, look, thank you very, very much. Michael Simmons there's data journalist at The Spectator. Look, I've got loads of emails coming in. I'm going to go to that inbox now to round off this hour, gbviews@gbnews.uk. And just to preview something we've got coming up, fingers crossed, later on in the show, which is Rishi Sunak and the Albanian Prime Minister, who are going to be holding a bit of a chat with us all at The Nation, a news conference, in relation to small boats crossings and criminal gangs as well. And what the Albanian PM has done is he touched down here, and there was maybe a vain hope of something quite conciliatory. And what he's basically saying is say that Suella Braverman has been disgraceful and borderline criminal as well for her comments about Albanian criminals crossing the channel. He is saying that's really unfair and it's disrespectful, and he's trying to basically make the point that what it could do is make us seem that all Albanians are criminals, which of course is not true. But at the same time, it is well known that, unfortunately, large numbers of Albanian criminals are crossing the channel, and you only have to look at the latest data, which shows that Albanians in British jails are costing the taxpayer around £57 million a year, which is a heck of a lot of money. And you just have to also look, not just in this country, but also Europe-wide. You just Google it now and you will see a huge amount of news reports from right across Europe about Albanian criminal gangs running the cocaine trade, running the cannabis trade, etc. So a lot of people, and certainly like the ones in my inbox here, gbviews@gbnews.uk, are saying, frankly, that Suella Braverman is absolutely right to raise the idea that there are criminal gangs coming across the channel. And indeed, the National Crime Agency is admitting it as well. They're saying that they are now taking over the cannabis trade and the cocaine trade as well. So there we go. Oh, yes, I'm going to go into there now. Patrick, if Sweden can say no to Albanians coming from, as they say, a safe country, this is from Mel, then why can't we? And I think that is going to be an area that I'm fascinated in, and I hope somebody questions the Albanian Prime Minister on this, which is that how can he simultaneously claim that Albania is a lovely, wonderful country and it's great and there isn't, the old criminal gangs network, etc., and then also square that with the fact that people are desperately trying to seek asylum from his country? How does that work? I think he's probably on a bit of a sticky wicket there, so we'll bring you up to date with all of that. If the Albanian PM says that Albanians crossing the channel are not criminals, then who are the people posing as Albanian criminals? That is another one, yes, also called Mel there, so we've double Melled at the end. But yeah, this is another thing as well, isn't it? I did have a chat from Amnesty International on earlier, Steve Valdez-Simmons, who's a regular on this show and on this channel, and he does come and talk to us and put his side up, and that is all great stuff. But there does appear to be, to me anyway, a willful burying of the heads in the sand when it comes to just very obvious criminal networks that are exploiting the channel migrant crisis in order to set up roots in this country and exploit the criminal enterprises. Keep your views coming in, though, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Also been quite a strong reaction to the junior doctors' strike. They've announced that there's going to be a 3-day strike in April, and what they've also said is that, get this, they want a 35% pay rise. Already people are dying. I've had my first-hand experience of this. Sorry to hear this, Linda. And it's absolutely terrible. That's Linda's view. I want yours as well. Get your views coming in, of course. Look, I've got loads more coming your way, including more from the Albanian Prime Minister, who has absolutely slammed Suella Braverman. Stay tuned.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office. More heavy showers to come through the rest of today, and tomorrow will be pretty similar as well. Gusty winds, a bit of sunshine in between the showers. It's a messy old pressure situation. Low pressure basically dominant, a whole host of weather fronts basically suggesting bands of showers will be moving in. These weather fronts in the southeast, though, bringing more persistent rain here. Quite a wet evening, some heavy bursts of rain. That rain edging away to the east, though, and should be gone from easternmost parts of England by midnight. Showers will follow, plenty of them coming into North Wales, Northern Ireland, and across much of Scotland. Some heavy ones, hail, thunder possible too. Clearer spells will develop across the south, but the breeze will stop temperatures falling too far, so we start the day at 6s and 7s. We start off with quite a bit of sunshine over the Midlands and eastern England on Friday morning. Elsewhere, it'll be a case of dodging the downpours. and then the showers develop pretty widely from late morning onwards. Heavy, thundery showers, but tending to zip through on a brisk wind. The winds will be quite light in parts of northern Scotland, meaning the showers here could be quite slow moving. Still actually quite mild, 10 or 11 across the north, 14, 15 possible further south in the brighter spells. But plenty more heavy showers to come during Friday evening, particularly for southern Scotland, Northern Ireland, moving into northern England as we head into the weekend. So more showers on Saturday. Again, won't rain all day. There'll be some brighter spells, but it could be pretty wet for Edinburgh and down into the far northeast of England with a brisk wind, certainly for much of the morning. Sunny spells developing elsewhere and a switch in the wind direction, bringing cooler air in across northern areas during Saturday. Further south, again, double figures, perhaps into the teens with some sunshine. But by the time we get to Sunday, temperatures will be falling across the board as that northerly wind brings chillier air for all.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not
believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Yes, hello, it's just gone 4 p.m. I'm Patrick Christys and this is GB News. Here's what's on the menu this hour, ladies and gentlemen. Believe it or not, the Albanian PM has absolutely slammed our Home Secretary Suella Braverman, saying that her comments about criminals crossing the channel are disgraceful and indeed borderline criminals themselves. Do you think he's got a bit of cheek? In other news as well, though, we are going to be talking about more mortgage misery. Look, what does this really mean? Not just for homeowners and home buyers as well, but with interest rates going up, for the money in your pocket. That's what I want to know. And yes, in other news as well, what about your kids? Because teachers, when they're not out on strike, they are protesting. They're protesting about Ofsted now because they are saying that the way that it's graded and the way that schools are graded is too harsh, it's punitive, and unfortunately has led to a death, a suicide. So we'll be delving into exactly how people can really grade schools. In other news as well, get a load of this. The French, well, some of them anyway, are actually threatening our king and queen. Find out why very shortly. Stay tuned. I'm Patrick Christys. Yeah, get in touch. GBviews at gbnews.uk. In about an hour or so, we're going to go live to Rishi Sunak and the Albanian Prime Minister. They will be talking about the illegal channel crossings. I want to know whether or not you think the Albanian PM has got a bit of cheek slating Suella Braverman, saying that her comments were disgraceful about criminal gangs crossing the channel. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Get them coming in, people. But right now, it's your headlines with Polly.
Patrick, thank you, and good afternoon to you. Well, as Patrick was saying, we're waiting for the Albanian Prime Minister to appear at Downing Street at the moment. These are live pictures coming to us from the steps of number 10 Downing Street. And as you were just hearing, the Albanian Prime Minister criticising the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, earlier on for singling out migrants from his country after she referred to some as criminals. Eddie Rama, you saw just then, going into number 10 Downing Street, meeting Rishi Sunak, described the comments as disgraceful. Suella Braverman made the remarks during an exchange in the House of Commons. Number 10 saying the Prime Minister is very much looking forward to constructive discussions with his Albanian counterpart when they talk about tackling the small boat crossings in the Channel. We'll get you more on that, of course, as news emerges from number 10 as to what they did exactly speak about. Well, on to other news. The Northern Ireland Secretary has told Stormont leaders there's no negotiating the Windsor framework and it will become law. Chris Heaton-Harris has been holding talks over the Prime Minister's post-Brexit trade deal at Hillsborough Castle. That's after a key element of the EU-UK agreement, known as the Stormont Break, was overwhelmingly passed in the House of Commons yesterday. Now, the DUP leader, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, says the Windsor framework is a sticking plaster that won't work.
I don't want to be in a situation where we're back into Stormont and in 18 months' time, because there are flaws in this Windsor framework, that we have another crisis. I want stability in Northern Ireland. I want a devolved government that is sustainable for the future and delivers for everyone in Northern Ireland. So I'm not working to someone's deadline. I'm working to get this right.
Well, the Northern Ireland Secretary Chris Heaton-Harris says leaders need to come together to make the deal work.
Well, the Windsor framework's not a sticking plaster. It's a solution to the problems that were produced by the protocol, and it will work. And the two sides to those negotiations which have concluded, the UK government and the European Union, are going to make that the framework work. Now I think it's down to the communities of Northern Ireland to work out how best it can work for them. I think it can work for them really well. I do believe it will herald, alongside the 25th anniversary of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, the next 25 years could be all about prosperity if everybody puts their shoulder to the wheel.
Well, in news away from Northern Ireland, Parliament has banned the Chinese-owned social media app TikTok from all government devices now. The ban follows security concerns from the House of Commons and Lords, but won't include personal devices. The Scottish Government has followed suit, with Scotland's Deputy First Minister saying the ban will be implemented immediately. John Swinney said the decision will help manage privacy risks from third-party sites. And that comes as the TikTok chief faced questions on security in the US Congress. Junior doctors in England will strike for 4 days between April the 11th and the 15th. The British Medical Association has accused the government of not being serious about resolving the pay dispute and says the Health Secretary has failed to make a credible offer. Steve Barclay claims the BMA were demanding a 35% pay rise. The union says they won't stop until they're paid what they're worth. The Bank of England raised the interest rate for the 11th time in a row today from 4% to 4.25%. That's in a bid to slow down the rising cost of living. It comes after a surprise rise in inflation, as well as a decision by the US Federal Reserve last night to raise their key rate by a similar percentage point. The central bank's also announced it expects the economy to grow slightly in the second quarter, revising a previous forecast it may contract. The UK and Welsh governments have announced 2 free ports will be created in Wales for the first time in a bid to boost the country's economy. The Celtic and Anglesey free ports in North Wales are expected to attract almost £5 billion in investment. It's also hoped they'll generate up to 20,000 jobs by the end of the decade. Wales's First Minister, Mark Drakeford, says the free ports will help the country take advantage of its green energy potential.
What they will create is a platform for those industries that will shape the future of Wales. If we know anything, it is that the supplies of oil and gas on which the world has relied will run out. We will all then need new supplies of energy, and Wales is perfectly placed to be part of the renewable energy of the future. And the free ports will provide us with entry point into all of that.
Now, a Nigerian politician has been found guilty of an organ harvesting plot involving a British hospital. Senator Ike Ekweremadu's wife and his wife Beatrice and a doctor were found guilty of conspiring to arrange the travel of a man to exploit him for his kidney. The victim, a 21-year-old street trader, was brought to the UK last year to provide the organ for the senator's daughter for an £80,000 private transplant. The case, heard at the Old Bailey, is a legal first. The National Education Union has staged a protest calling on the government to urgently reform the school inspections system. The union is handing a petition signed by more than 45,000 people to the Department for Education asking for it to replace Ofsted. It follows the death of a head teacher, Ruth Perry, who took her own life waiting for an inspection report which downgraded her school in Berkshire to the lowest possible rating. You're with GB News. More news coming up in half an hour. Let's get back to Patrick.
OK, wonderful people. Loads to go out today. We're going to be talking about the Albanian Prime Minister slamming Suella Braverman. Interest rates have been hiked as well. Was Boris vindicated yesterday? I want to know what you think about all of that. Teachers protesting against Ofsted and French militants threatening our king. I'll tell you why very shortly, but loads to get through, as I've just said. And we start with the growing problem of Albanian migrants crossing the Channel. Rishi Sunak has just welcomed the Albanian Prime Minister, Edi Rama, to Downing Street. And you saw those live pictures on GB News just a moment ago. Actually, Polly brought them to you. And the pair will discuss, obviously, the migrant crisis. But Rama really stoked the fires ahead of this meeting today by accusing our Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, of making disgraceful and borderline criminal comments. Braverman said last year that if Labour were in power, they would allow all the Albanian criminals to come to this country, clearly making reference to, well, Albanian criminals coming across in small boats. Now, Rami hit back today, and he said her comment was a very, very disgraceful moment for British politics and an ethnic seal, and that a few rotten apples did not define a nation. He is saying that it basically made all Albanians sound like criminals, OK? So figures show that at least 13,000 Albanians entered Britain on small boats last year alone, which was just under a third of all arrivals. But get a load of this, because it comes as reports predict that as a result of the government's new illegal migration bill, more than 150,000 people will be denied asylum in the next 3 years. So under the new rules, if the rates of people coming across the Channel continue or even just decrease a little bit, around 150,000 people we will say no to. But unless something changes, we won't be able to actually deport them. And what this means, ladies and gentlemen, for the money in your pocket, or lack of it, frankly, is that it will cost you around £9 billion over that 3-year period to accommodate and detain arrivals who, of course, we cannot remove. Joining me now is politics and history professor at the Academy of Sciences of Albania. It's Afrim Krasniki. Thank you very, very much for joining me. Do you think that our Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, was wrong to point out that Albanian criminals are crossing the Channel?
I think the declaration of the minister, it was not correct about to bring together criminals and Albanian immigrants. So we have many Albanian in your country who are very they make a career, they are artists, they are researchers, they are intellectuals. And other sides, we have many criminals. I think the duty of our government, our prime minister, is not to commend the declaration of the minister, but to find a way to stop the canal of immigration and to bring a future for this young generation who have decided to leave Albania.
Can you understand why members of the British public are very, very concerned? Because we currently spend around £57 million a year housing Albanian nationals in British prisons. We are also seeing a huge rise in the cocaine trade and the cannabis trade fuelled by Albanian gangs. That's according to people like the National Crime Agency, so official sources. We'll also read reports from across Europe of Albanian gangs running nefarious activities there, drugs, sex trafficking, etc. And then we also see that Albanians are making up a very high proportion of people coming across the Channel. So can you understand why people are concerned that we are importing Albanian criminals?
I think the problem is that they have some. We see the information about some criminals or some bans, but we have agreement between our governments. If the governments are agreed to send these people in Albania in the prison, this will be very correct. But other sides, we see that always the negative news is always headline, and we need, for example, we have interest in Albania to have a different connection to your country and to know Albanian better. They are not only the criminals who represent Albania. There are other people, other sector. And for this reason, I think that the correct visit of the Prime Minister is a lost chance to know Albania. He's today to speak only about criminals and the immigrants, not about to present Albanian in UK and to bring more tourists or more investment in Albania. If we see the map of this guy in Albania, mostly they are from poor zones. So we have a crisis in Albania, political crisis, economical crisis. We have this situation more than 2 decades before in Greece and Italy, but all immigrants in this country today, they are integrated. The difference between the immigrants in UK and other countries, the mostly educated people, they are leaving Albania to go in Germany with a contract.
Absolutely. Look, absolutely. And that is a really important distinction, and nobody is disputing that at all, which is, genuine immigration and a large Albanian population in this country who work very hard, etc. But a lot of people are very confused about why so many Albanians are trying to claim asylum in this country. You seem to be saying that you think Albania is a perfectly safe country and that people don't really need asylum over here.
Yes, but we must make a difference between a stable country and democratic country. Albania is a stable country, but it's not it's not a democratic country. And to have a democracy, so we must build the future for the people here. We must find a job for the young generation here, and we must make something to make a prognosis for the future of these guys in Albania. I think the government of Albania has failed in this direction, and last year we see many crises. Last crisis it was in Ukraine and Russia, and we pay a price for this, and we pay a price for COVID situation and the impact in Albanian economy and Albanian politics. So I don't see the only solution to stop the criminals or the groups or these immigrants to come in your country, but I see a need about a strategy to bring a future for this young generation in Albania. And for this, I think it's the duty of the government.
Look, absolutely. People will understand completely that if Albania becomes a much more economically attractive place to live, then fewer people would want to leave. But I've got to ask you, in light of that then, in your view, are the Albanians taking small boats across the Channel refugees or economic migrants?
Well, mostly from them, I think they are members of the family who have immigrated before in your country. So they are from only 2 or 3 cities, and they have someone in your country, so they use this connection to go to them and to try to integrate. Right. And some of them, they find this connection through criminal channels. And for this reason, it was this scandal in the last years. But if you see the name or the cases or the information in social network, we see that they make very open, and I think they make they've been helped by criminal groups in other countries, especially in some country who are in your border and who have connection with your group, informal groups in your country.
And
so
it's
very important for us.
Yeah. Absolutely. And are they being forced to make this journey, or are they choosing to?
I think that mostly from them, they choose this for economical reason, not for political reason. They don't see any future to go as illegal in other European countries. It's very easy to go today in Germany with a contract, so they don't need to go as immigrants. And they use this momentum to go in your country as illegal. I think the better way will be to try to have a database of these people. Mostly from them, they have a not real name, and they profit from the situation and from the crisis. So our government, with your government, must think to make a new strategy, to communicate more, and to have an exchange in ministerial level We don't have, for example, the only prime minister in the Europa countries who don't pay any visit in Albania is the British prime minister. So we need to have more delegation to know Albania, to speak with the people, to give more information, and we need more journalists from your country to know Albania better, to make a conversation with this.
But can I say part of the problem is, look, I really, really enjoyed talking to you, and it's been great. Part of the problem, I think, for a lot of people like me is that when we ask you normal questions, and you've been great, there are other journalists in this country who say that every single person coming across the channel is a refugee and an asylum seeker, and it's almost like we're not allowed to say what we can see coming before us and talk about the economic situation in Albania, and maybe that's the main reason behind what's going on. I really appreciate our conversation, and thank you very, very much. I hope to talk to you again. I hope to talk to you again soon. We're out of time, I'm afraid, but I hope to talk to you again soon. It's Afrin Krasniki there, who is Professor of Politics and History at the Academy of Sciences of Albania. Look, what do you make of that, ladies and gentlemen? GBViews at gbnews.uk. Get your views coming in. I am also joined now by UK Border Force Chief Immigration Officer Kevin Saunders, who is on this particular issue. A cheeky little reminder, ladies and gents, that in about an hour we're going to go live to Rishi Sunak and the Albanian Prime Minister. The Albanian Prime Minister who did just absolutely slam Braverman and say that it was disgraceful that she said that Albanian criminals were crossing the channel. Kevin, I don't know if you heard much of that, but isn't it interesting there that we have an Albanian man talking about Albania and as a professor at an Albanian university who can say that the majority of people coming across the channel from Albania are economic migrants, but our media won't let you say that?
Yes, I thought that was very relevant. I mean, he really shot himself in the foot, didn't he, by saying that they were economic migrants. And in fact, if you look at the facts, the majority of these Albanians are coming from northern Albania, where it's a pretty poor country, and they're escaping to the UK, where they are working, and we've got to be honest here, Patrick, they are working in criminal enterprises. Every time the NCA do a drugs bust, 9 times out of 10, they're Albanians. So I'm afraid they are working in the black economy and the criminal activities.
Right, so basically Suella Braverman was right to say that there are Albanian criminals coming across the channel and she shouldn't apologise for that.
Oh, she was spot on. Absolutely spot on. But I wouldn't worry too much about what the Albanian Prime Minister says to or about Suella Braverman. The key is going to be what he says with the Prime Minister at 5 o'clock this evening. But we really have got to get these Albanians removed. I mean, what I find is so difficult is Germany doesn't have any problems at all removing them and disallowing. They won't accept any claim whatsoever for asylum or human trafficking or anything from Albanians. And Sweden is the same. So we're dragging our feet a little bit here.
And what do you make of the fact that it's apparently going to cost £9 billion for the British taxpayer over the next 3 years to not be able to deport or remove the 150,000 people we're expecting to deny asylum to under our new illegal migration bill?
Well, I looked at what the Refugee Council said, and then I looked at what the Home Office said. And as you can imagine, they're miles apart. The Home Office say they don't recognise the figures at all. So it's a bit difficult. I mean, what you've got to remember is that the Refugee Council are working their figures on what's going on at the moment. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen about Rwanda. We don't know how efficient the French are going to be with the extra money that we've given them. We don't know what deterrent the detention centre that the French are going to build in northern France, what effect that's going to have. And the French police, when they're not dealing with rioters in Paris, will be back on the Nord Pas de Calais department, moving the asylum seekers on.
Look, thank you very much, Kevin. Always a pleasure. Kevin Saunders, former Chief Immigration Officer at UK Border Force. You mentioned France. We're going to be talking about France a little bit later on, actually, because we do know there's been riots there, haven't there, for a variety of different days now. And apparently there have been threats made against King Charles and Queen Camilla, who are due to go on a state visit over there, a royal visit, and apparently they may well be targeted. That's the latest. So what do you make of that? Anyway, there was more bad news, though, for millions of households today, as the Bank of England increased the interest rate for the 11th time in a row. The rate had been expected to remain at around 4%, But after today's unexpected rise in inflation, 7 out of 9 members of the bank's Monetary Policy Committee voted in favour of hiking the interest rate by 0.25%. Now, I am joined by Roger Gewolb, who is a former advisor to the Bank of England and the Treasury. Look, Roger, thank you very much. Is the Bank of England wrong to do this?
Totally.
Why?
Totally wrong. Bailey's boosts are beggaring Britain, frankly. It's insane. We are now on our 11th interest rate rise, up to 4.25%, as you say, in a little over a year. It's the highest interest rate in 14 years. And all of this is against the advice of more experts than there are pounds in Richie Rich's tax bill. They're actually driving the country further into a hole and fueling the banking crisis. In America, the interest rate rises there actually caused the banking crisis. For example, Silicon Valley Bank raised its interest rates and attracted huge numbers of deposits and did all other sorts of things that it did, which caused its crash, which it wouldn't have done if it hadn't had constantly rising interest rates. And it's a left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing situation, Patrick, in the sense that doesn't Mr. Bailey, the blundering Andrew Bailey, as the Mail called him, doesn't he and his colleagues take cognizance of the fact that Rishi Rich and Haughty Hunt have just raised corporation tax by 1/3, and all of that pretty much is going to be passed on to consumers? It's just absolutely beyond the pale.
Yeah, Roger, there will be loads of people shouting at their TV screens now or shouting at their radio sets going, yes, go on, Roger, I agree with you. Because for the average person on the street, if they're looking to get on the property ladder now, they'll look at these interest rates and they'll think, well, it was already so expensive, I can't afford this. Then they might decide to go into their local shop and their local supermarket and they'll think, goodness me, the price of that has gone up, that's gone through the roof. And then they'll think, all right, well, maybe I'll start my own business. Oh, well, it can't because the corporation tax is absolutely staggering as well. And then the energy bills, etc., etc., etc. And you think, hang on a minute, Roger, what's really going on here? Does the Bank of England really know what's happening with ordinary people out there? What should they be doing differently?
They should never have started raising interest rates, Patrick. We have what's called cost-push inflation. That is non-consumer-driven inflation. You don't fight cost-push inflation by raising interest rates. It's basic economics. In America, the situation's rather different. They've got some serious demand-pull inflation. They've got $1.7 trillion of money in mattresses from the pandemic that's been saved up that's now being spent with alacrity. They're going crazy. They've got to damp that down. And hey, guess what? It works. U.S. inflation is down to 5.3%. But here, these 11 rate rises have done nothing whatsoever to protect us against inflation. It keeps going up because cost-push inflation runs itself out. You can't control it with interest rates. Mr. Bailey says, oh, yeah, but I'm also protecting the dollar. Well, hey, how's that working out for you? That's really a great job. We're still at 120-something instead of the 150 where we've always been. You can't stop people spending money on food and energy. We got to eat. We've got to keep warm.
Yeah, look, Roger, thank you very much. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I hope to get you back on very soon. It's Roger Gewolb there, who's a former advisor to the Bank of England and the Treasury. Many people may be wishing he still was, actually. That was great stuff. Right, OK, what else have I got for you? Oh, yes, this. Well, I've got a big question this afternoon, people. Is Wales the most woke country in Europe? Apparently it is. Apparently it is. I'll tell you why very, very shortly. I'm Patrick Christys, and this is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
TikTok is to be banned from all Parliament's devices and networks over security concerns, believe it or not. Parliamentarians will be able to continue using the app on their phones, data, but it will be blocked from accessing it on parliamentary Wi-Fi. The Scottish Government also announced that it will follow ministers in Westminster by banning the video sharing app from official devices. Let me know what you think about all of this. Our political reporter Olivia Utley is here. So, TikTok.
So, yes, this is all against the backdrop of an investigation that's going on in the US, where congressmen are talking to the CEO of TikTok about Chinese influence on the company. And essentially, in a very brief nutshell, the problem is that there's a worry, both in the US and here, that TikTok could be being used by the Chinese essentially as a massive spy device to get into British military phones, get into British politics phones and access the data. And the Chinese Communist Party actually have a policy where companies, Chinese-owned companies, have to give over the data that they get through their business to the Chinese government. So the questions that are going on in the US Congress now center around how TikTok is managing to get around these rules, if it is getting around these rules, or if the data that TikTok is harvesting from US military phones and from, you can conclude, British politicians' phones, is being used by the Chinese government, which would obviously be a massive worry.
Well, people say, don't they, that nothing really gets sanctioned or created in China without the say-so of the Chinese government and authorities there. So it would imply, then, that Chinese authorities are involved in it. I'm keen as well, there's some other really big political stories going around at the minute as well. Boris Johnson's on the front of all the national newspapers today. We had a rather long time with him yesterday, didn't we? What's the fallout and the reaction been from his grilling yesterday, then?
Well, the general consensus seems to be it wasn't a total catastrophe for him. it could have been better, but it could have been worse. And basically, people feel, I think this is the way I would, this is what my instinct is, that he defended himself quite well against allegations that he deliberately lied. He was pretty good when he was talking about how if it was so obvious, then why would he have invited an official, if it was so obvious that he was breaking the rules, why would he have invited a non-pretend official photographer to come and record the fact that he'd broken the rules? And he points to the article that was in the Times after one of these events, talking about cake and singing happy birthday, and no one seems to raise an eyebrow at the time. So he did manage to defend himself well against that allegation. Where he was very uncomfortable, and where I think the committee will come down hard on him, is the fact that he didn't really do very much to try and correct the record once it had become clear that he'd made a mistake. So my feeling is that quite possibly the committee will accept that he didn't deliberately lie, but will get him under the lower bar of recklessly misleading Parliament.
Exactly, that's the thing, whether or not he did enough to just double-check that when he was being told that everything was all right, that it actually was all right, which actually, frankly, could well be a bit of a win for Boris, because it might not result in the kind of maximum ban in the by-election, etc. We'll have to wait and see on that. Just another quick one while I've got you is about tax returns. They're dropping left, right and centre, aren't they?
They are. So Keir Starmer's tax return has literally just dropped minutes ago, so I haven't had a chance to look at it properly. But it looks as though he paid... I mean, he's not nearly as rich as Rishi
I wonder whether or not they're across the dispatch box there. It's like, my tax return's bigger than yours, mate.
But it's actually, weirdly, my tax return's smaller than yours.
Yeah.
But the Rishi Sunak released his tax return for all the time that he's been leader of the party, all the time that he's been in frontline politics, whereas Keir Starmer's only released it from when he was Labour leader. So we can, there are thoughts that he might have been earning more before he took over the job as Labour leader and various sort of consultancy work, etc., possibly, which he hasn't revealed. So this won't give us quite the full picture. But long story short, Starmer's not as rich as Rishi Sunak.
Starmer's shock horror. Stop the press. Keir Starmer is not as rich as Rishi Sunak and his billionaire wife. There we go. All right, look, Olivia, thank you very much. Olivia Rutley there on Political Reporter. Yeah, you can just imagine it's one of those few times that you ever hear men trying to convince the other man that theirs is smaller than the other one, weren't you? But there we go. Anyway, there's loads more still to come on this show. A day after it emerged that Rishi Sunak has paid more than £1 million in tax in the last 3 years, we will debate, perfectly timed this, is Rishi too rich to rule? And the French are revolting. Leave that there. It's all kicking off in Paris ahead of King Charles's visit to France this weekend. So, yes, find out why they've threatened our King and Queen. But first, it's time for your latest headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Patrick, thank you, and good afternoon to you. The top stories on GB News. The Prime Minister is discussing the migrant crisis with his Albanian counterpart right now in Downing Street, saying he wants to hold constructive talks on tackling small boat crossings across the English Channel. That's after Edi Rama criticised the Home Secretary for singling out people from his country, referring to them as criminals during an exchange in the House of Commons. He described the comments as disgraceful and said he wants all Albanians in the UK to feel safe and honoured. The Northern Ireland Secretary, Chris Heaton-Harris, has told Stormont leaders there's no negotiating the Windsor Framework and it will become law. That's after a key element of the EU-UK agreement, known as the Stormont Break, was overwhelmingly passed in the Commons yesterday. DUP leader Sir Geoffrey Donaldson says the Windsor Framework is just a sticking plaster that won't work. Parliament has banned the Chinese-owned social media app TikTok from all government devices. It follows security concerns from the House of Commons and Lords, but won't include personal devices. Scotland has followed suit, with its Deputy First Minister saying the ban will be implemented immediately. Junior doctors in England will strike for 4 days between April the 11th and 15th. The British Medical Association has accused the government of not being serious about resolving the pay dispute and says the Health Secretary has failed to make a credible offer. Steve Barclay claims the BMA is demanding a 35% pay rise. And the Bank of England today has raised the interest rate for the 11th consecutive time from 4% to 4.25%. That comes after a surprise rise in inflation, as well as a decision yesterday by the US Federal Reserve to raise its key rate by a similar amount. The central bank's also announced it expects the economy to grow slightly in the second quarter, revising a previous forecast that it would contract. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and on the TuneIn app. You're with GB News, the People's Channel. Back to Patrick.
Yes, now this is an absolutely fascinating case, ladies and gentlemen. A 28-year-old man has appeared in court charged with the attempted murder of two elderly men who were set alight in the street after they left mosques in Birmingham and London. Jack Carson is outside Birmingham Magistrates Court with us right now, and Jack is going to give us an update on the latest goings-on. Yes, Jack, what's going on?
Well, today at Birmingham Magistrates Court, Patrick, 28-year-old Mohammed Abkur appeared charged with the attempted murder of two men. He spoke only to enter his name, his address and his date of birth, and the man, originally from Sudan, needed an interpreter in court. Now, West Midlands Police say he is alleged to have set fire to two men on two separate occasions. One to an 82-year-old man in Ealing in London on the 27th of February, and one on Monday in Edgbaston in Birmingham. That incident involves 70-year-old Mohammed Ryaz, who was set on fire as he walked home from the Dudley Road Mosque around 7 o'clock that night, on Monday night. It's thought that yesterday he had to undergo a skin graft operation because of the severity of the burns he's received in that incident. Abkur was arrested on Tuesday on Dudley Road on suspicion of attempted murder for that incident, but after working with the Metropolitan Police and also counter-terrorism, he was further arrested yesterday on suspicion of the same offence to an 82-year-old man, Hashi Adowa, who suffered severe burns back in February when walking home from an Islamic centre in Ealing. Now, Abkur gave no indication of a plea, and the judge has said that he will remain in custody until the end of September, where the judge expects the trial to have taken place before that time is up. And he's going to appear for the first hearing at Birmingham Crown Court on April the 20th. But in terms of the investigation, West Midlands Police still appealing to members of the public for any CCTV footage, doorbell footage or any other kind of video footage that can help them in this investigation.
Yeah, Jack, thank you very much for bringing us up to date there. That's Jack Carson there, our West Midlands reporter, just telling you about, that case. It's, of course, broke. I think we were live on this show, actually, on Monday when the second alleged incident took place there. So we'll keep you up to date as and when we get more information. Now, moving away from that and go towards Wales. Rishi Sunak was in Wales earlier, and he was visiting a new free port in Anglesey. Now, it's one of the two new free ports, which it's claimed will attract billions of investment, create 20,000 new jobs by the end of the decade. Well, that sounds like great news, doesn't it? Good news, brilliant. But what's going on with the rest of Wales? Because apparently, it's not so good. Recently, former Labour MP Tom Harris claimed Wales is, get this, the wokest country in Europe, and said that if you want to know what Keir Starmer has in store for Britain, look no further than that country. So there we go. I am joined now, I believe, by the political consultant Matthew McKinnon, who's a political consultant and director of Transmit Digital. And look, Matthew, thank you very much. I mean, is Wales the woke capital of Europe?
Well, where to start, Patrick? Where to start? I mean, on the environment, Wales are pushing through some absolutely really dangerous legislation regarding our roads. They're banning road building, which I know you covered a few weeks ago. They are implementing 50-mile-an-hour zones pretty much throughout the whole of South Wales on all of our dual carriageways and our motorways, slowing down the economy. They're making 20-mile-an-hour zones throughout all urbanised areas, including small market towns in North and Mid Wales. They're bringing in really strange legislation for landlords, discrimination legislation, insinuating that landlords are inherently discriminatory towards ethnic minorities. They're bringing a race action plan for Wales, basically saying the Welsh population is inherently racist and they need to be educated to make sure that they aren't in the future. And then we've got sport. I mean, I know you covered this a few weeks ago, but Delilah, I was out in Cardiff the day after for the rugby, and town was singing it louder than ever. We have a bubbling Cardiff Bay of politicians who are totally out of touch with the rest of Wales.
What does woke mean for you? Because I think a lot of people will have been hearing the first bit of that about speed limits and building rights or lack of, etc. Well, that's not necessarily woke, but is it part of a bigger agenda? Is it that, in your view, maybe the kind of people who back bizarre, potentially economically damaging environmental measures also tend to think that we're all riddled with unconscious bias and that we're all inherently racist and et cetera, et cetera?
Absolutely, and it's a view that's really held by a small percentage of people, but they are ones that hold significant positions of power within Welsh society, and their views are pretty fringe, to be honest. If you look at, Unheard did some polling a few weeks ago on the UK and views on issues around trans rights, on race, on immigration, and Wales was quite mainstream along with most of England, and the views were actually pretty similar. But in Wales, we have a small minority of people that are really pushing a set agenda. I do think what you said was bang on the money, that a lot of them are integrated with their views on the environment and their views on social and economic policy.
And why is it such a bad thing? Is it just that, the overwhelming majority of people in Wales do not agree with this and they're having it pushed on them even subtly? You mentioned something there about a landlord's racial discrimination act or something. What's that?
Well, it's basically where they give landlords training on how to not use unconscious bias when looking at having people rent properties from them. And I know people in Wales, business people and investors, who are looking to invest over the border in England to avoid this sort of legislation because they think it's an absolute nonsense. And as you know, and as every one of our viewers knows that studies economics, the Welsh economy really isn't the best economy in the UK. It's been lagging behind for years. Under devolution, it's fallen massively behind even Scotland. And instead of focusing really their resources and energy on pushing on with the economy like most people in Wales really want, they're focusing on a lot of these minority issues that people don't really care about.
But hang on, is this maybe we've just struck down into exactly why a lot of these political parties are so obsessed with things like culture wars, so obsessed with fringe minority issues, so obsessed by being able to say, look, under our watch, we've made sure that landlords in Swansea are no longer openly racist, even when there was probably not a lot of openly racist landlords in Swansea to begin with. Is it because it means that they don't actually have to sort out the real issues, like, I don't know, the Welsh NHS?
Absolutely, and the former economy minister in Wales openly admitted a few years ago they don't have a clue what they're doing with the Welsh economy. And I think that really sums up the problem here, is because they can't win on issues like the economy and they actually can't fix the mess we're currently in, they're focusing on other issues, such as the ones we've discussed, in a way to distract the public and try and get some wins that they perceive to be wins for their base.
Well, there you go. Look, thank you very much. And the emails are flying in from John Escobar, who I am sure is no relation of Pablo, but he says that he moved from Cardiff to England after the pandemic because he thought that the Welsh government was totally in control. And I was asking what people think woke means, and Brian says he thinks it means sticking a middle finger up to ordinary people. So there we go, a range of views. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Matthew, thank you very much. Matthew McKinnon there, who's a political consultant and the director of Transmit Digital, reacting to a story that broke about the idea that Wales is now supposedly, on paper at least, the wokest country in Europe. So what do you make of that, people of Wales? Anyway, moving on. Are lefties going to ruin King Charles' state visit to France? You heard. Apparently, King Charles and Queen Camilla are going to be targeted by a baying mob. I'm Patrick Christys and this is GB News.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m. Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, well, the footage you will be able to see on your screens there is Rishi Sunak meeting with the Albanian Prime Minister. He's got talks with him, he's called Edi Rama, about the migrant crisis. We will hear live from Rama from 5:30. Bear in mind, he's absolutely slammed Home Secretary Suella Braverman earlier today, just before he met Rishi Sunak, saying that her comments about criminals crossing the channel, Albanian criminals crossing the channel, were disgraceful and borderline criminal themselves. We'll return to that. Another story now, though. Should we get rid of Ofsted? The National Education Union has handed over a petition to the government calling for the school grading body to be replaced. The petition has been signed by more than 45,000 people, and schools are also removing logos and references to Ofsted ratings from their website. Now, it does come, very sadly, after head teacher Ruth Perry took her own life whilst waiting for a report which she feared would be negative. Well, Mark Lehane is in the studio with me now. He's Head of Education at the Centre for Policy Studies and a former teacher. And I think it is important to, without being insensitive, try to separate the very, very tragic news about this particular lady who sadly took her own life and the wider issue of Ofsted and the way that schools are graded. And I think parents might be concerned that teachers don't want to be graded.
So listen, Ofsted is a high-stakes event in any school's term or year. And I know as a head teacher for 5 years, I went through 2 Ofsteds. It is on your mind a lot when you know you're sort of coming up to a period of time when they might come in. But that's only natural. Like, it is important that we know what's going on in our schools. And there is no doubt that since 1992, when Ofsted came into being, schools got a lot better, not just because of inspections. There were inspections in a different way before then. But Ofsted has been an important part of why schools nowadays are a lot better than they were. Now, there's a genuine debate to be had about what Ofsted look at and how they go about doing it. But the concern I've got about some of the debate going on right now is it's sending out a message to the wider community that you should just trust us as teachers, what goes on in our schools. Just give us the money. And remember, we're talking about £60 billion a year goes into our schools. Yeah. You just trust us to get on.
Pay rises and all of this stuff.
Yeah, and all that. And we need to put a lot of money into our schools. And an important part of what Ofsted do is, 1, to make sure that kids are safe. OK. 2, to make sure that that money is being spent wisely and sensibly so that kids get a good education. And I just think we need to make sure, if we're asking kids to follow the rules, which is really important, we can't have teachers turn around and saying, no, Ofsted, you're not coming into our school. I mean, not only is that illegal, that's a criminal offence, and I was a bit worried then some of the head teacher unions and high-profile teachers came out and backed the head teacher that said they weren't going to let Ofsted into their school. It's not on. We've got to be grown up and
So there was a head teacher, wasn't there, that did try to block Ofsted in the wake of this going into a school. I think they were politely reminded that it is a criminal offence, and so, therefore, that couldn't take place. But one area that I think hasn't been spoken about some of the good that Ofsted does is with faith schools as well, I think. Ofsted really do get involved where let's be honest with you, you know, sometimes some schools maybe try to operate slightly under the radar and work a very different curriculum and set of norms and values. And Ofsted is good in those areas, I think, isn't it?
Well, Ofsted look at a whole range of settings. They inspect children's homes, they see how children's social care and education bits of local authorities work. They also inspect private schools, and also they're the ones that we send in if we need to know if there's bad stuff going on in independent schools. And they've got a difficult job. By definition, if you are Her Majesty's Chief Inspector, you have to speak truth to power, so you have to tell the government if they're getting stuff wrong. You also have to tell the profession and teachers if they're getting stuff wrong, and they've got some very, very sensitive, difficult jobs to do.
Again, I want to make abundantly clear, you know, there is a tragic backstory to the latest round of Ofsted criticism, which is that sadly a head teacher took her own life, and that is incredibly, incredibly bleak, and obviously we wish her family all of the best. Just trying to disassociate slightly from that, look at the bigger picture on it and say, you know, some people might be forgiven for thinking, well, teachers maybe got to mark their own homework a little bit during the pandemic when it came to exam results, etc. Out on strike in terms of pay rises, and now do they just not want to be criticised and held to account for the job that they do? Do you think you would have some sympathy for parents who might have that view?
I think some people might hold that view, but when I started teaching 20 years ago, even then, Ofsted wasn't very popular and head teachers felt pressure for exam results. Listen, the whole country, indeed the whole world, has been through a difficult time the last few years. Schools did an amazing job generally during the pandemic. They felt the pressure, in particular head teachers and senior leaders felt the pressure trying to run their schools and keep kids safe. We've had strike action. Things are very intense and emotional right now. The key thing, I think, is that we all come together and work constructively to figure out how we do things better.
Look, great stuff. Thank you very much, as ever, for coming into the studio. Always much appreciated. Mark Lahane there, who is the head of education at the Centre for Policy Studies and, of course, a former teacher. Right, now, get a load of this, ladies and gentlemen, because King Charles risks facing rubbish-filled streets, transport strikes and disruption to his visit when he travels to France later this week on his first foreign trip as monarch. But actually, it's a little bit more sinister as well, because apparently some militant French individuals have actually said that they are going to target the King and Queen Consort when they do go and visit. So that's quite dangerous stuff. His Majesty's planned tour, which is intended as a sentiment of cross-channel relations after years of disputes, comes amidst the midst of these protests, and our television viewers will be able to see them now. It is bleak stuff. Tons of rubbish has been piled onto the streets of Paris, where the King is due to arrive this Sunday. Trade unionists have threatened to target this planned visit by stopping the King in Bordeaux, apparently. To shed some more light on this, I am joined by Stephen Clarke, who's the author of Elizabeth II, Queen of Laughs. He also wrote 1,000 Years of Annoying the French, which I think we can all agree is a fantastic, fantastic piece of literature. Look, thank you very much. Do you think that the French will really be targeting our King? It seems a bit rum.
Well, they're not going to be targeting him particularly. It's just that, sadly, this visit is coming at a really sensitive, bad time, because at the moment the French are on high alert for any sign of sort of privilege and wealth, because there are massive demonstrations going on about raising the retirement age from 62 to 64, which probably in the UK sounds very low, but over here they're mad about it. And so King Charles it's true, is going to be arriving in a city where, in some parts of the city, rubbish hasn't been collected for about 2 weeks. And out in the streets yesterday, I saw that someone had very kindly kind of pushed it all against the walls and things like that. But sadly, in areas where there are going to be demonstrations during the week, people have been setting light to these dustbins, as you see from your.
Can I just put something to you which appears to be one of the new lines out today, which is this is from Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who is a regular presidential candidate there, leader of the France Unbowed party. And he was talking about the royal visit, and he says, it's not the right time. He says, Mr. King, listen, we have nothing against you here, but you're the King of the English. That's your business. You should stay away from Versailles. What do you make of that? What do you think about that? Oh, hard to tell if he's frozen or not, or if he's just gone to sleep. There you go. He wouldn't be the only one, of course, though, would he? Look, anyway, that's a sad loss, ladies and gentlemen. That was Stephen Clarke, albeit briefly. He author of Elizabeth II, Queen of Laughs, ironically, and he also wrote the 1,000 Years of Annoying the French. So there we go. Well, look, ladies and gentlemen, we have got loads coming your way, including the Albanian Prime Minister, who is going to be talking about the migrant crisis live here on GB News this afternoon. So probably in about half an hour or so's time, we won't let you miss it, so we'll go to it as soon as it happens. We've got the Albanian Prime Minister and Rishi Sunak. They're going to be talking about the channel crossings, criminal gangs, the migrant crisis, etc., and presumably the way that we are working with the Albanians to try to stop it. But it does come amid a backdrop of a pretty robust rebuttal of Suella Braverman from the Albanian PM. In fact, it was more than robust. He absolutely slated Suella Braverman. He said that it was disgraceful that Suella Braverman said that Albanian criminals are coming across the channel and that under Labour, Albanian criminals would continue to come at an even more rapid rate. This also, I think, will become a shock to people that that's even controversial, given the fact that the British taxpayer, who's reportedly currently paying £57 million a year to house Albanian criminals at Her Majesty's pleasure. And, of course, as a lot of us know, the Albanian criminals are indeed running various different sectors, such as the cocaine and cannabis trade, not just here, but in Europe. And when we look at the fact that 13,000 at least arrived on small boats last year, majority of whom, of course, young men, it is, I suspect, reasonable to question whether or not every single person coming over here from Albania does have the best of intentions at heart. But, of course, as the Albanian PM pointed out, we don't want to group everyone in the same bracket. I'm Patrick Christys, and this is GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Yes, hello everybody. It's just gone 5 p.m. I'm Patrick Christys and this is GB News. And I've got a big hour for you, ladies and gents. Here's what is on the menu. We're going to go live shortly, very shortly, to Rishi Sunak and the Albanian Prime Minister because they're going to be doing a conference about the illegal channel crossings and about the cooperation between the two nations. But it does come as the Albanian PM got rather shirty with Suella Braverman. He was saying that her language about criminals crossing the channel was demonising Albanian people. What do you make of that? Strong views in the inbox, get them coming in. Another big one for us as well. More mortgage misery. It's about inflation rates, OK, and interest rates as well, I should say. What does it mean for you? It's not just about homeowners, home buyers, people selling. It's also about savers, and frankly, it's all of us, isn't it? The Bank of England has been massively criticised for allegedly mismanaging our economy. Do you feel richer? Do you feel poorer? I think I know the answer to that. I've got all this coming and much, much more very, very shortly. I'm Patrick Christys, and this is GB News. OK, like I said, keep your eyes and ears peeled. Shortly, we're going to take you live over to Rishi Sunak and the Albanian PM as they talk about the illegal channel crossing. So make sure you get in touch on that as well. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Do you think the Albanian Prime Minister was a bit cheeky to criticise Suella Braverman for saying that sometimes Albanian criminals are coming across the channel? Get in touch. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Right now, though, it's your headlines with Polly.
This is GB News, and thank you, Patrick. The top story this hour. Well, as Patrick was saying, the Prime Minister is discussing the migrant crisis right now with his Albanian counterpart in Downing Street, saying he wants to hold constructive talks on tackling the small boat crossings in the English Channel. And that comes after Edi Rama criticised the Home Secretary, as Patrick was saying, for singling out people from his country, referring to them as criminals during one exchange in the House of Commons. He described the comments as disgraceful and said he wants all Albanians in the UK to feel safe and honoured. Well, the Northern Ireland Secretary has told Stormont leaders there's no negotiating the Windsor framework and it will become law. Chris Heaton-Harris has been holding talks over the Prime Minister's post-Brexit trade deal at Hillsborough Castle. And that comes after a key element of the EU-UK agreement, known as the Stormont Break, was overwhelmingly passed in the House of Commons yesterday. The DUP leader, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, described the Windsor framework as a sticking plaster that won't work. But the Northern Ireland Secretary says leaders need to come together to make the deal work.
Well, the Windsor framework's not a sticking plaster. It's a solution to the problems that were produced by the protocol, and it will work. And the two sides to those negotiations which have concluded, the UK government and the European Union, are going to make that the framework work. Now I think it's down to the communities of Northern Ireland to work out how best it can work for them. I think it can work for them really well. I do believe it will herald, alongside the 25th anniversary of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, the next 25 years could be all about prosperity if everybody puts their shoulder to the wheel.
Well, news coming to us within the last hour or so. The Labour leader has released the amount of tax he's paid on his income and capital gains tax over the last couple of years. Sir Keir Starmer says he's paid £118,580 in tax since the start of 2021. That's after the Prime Minister published his tax documents yesterday, which showed he paid more than £1 million in tax over the last 3 years. Now, Parliament has banned the Chinese-owned social media app TikTok from all government devices. It follows security concerns from the House of Commons and Lords, but won't include personal devices. Scotland has followed suit, with its Deputy First Minister saying the ban will be implemented immediately. The decision comes as TikTok's chief executive faces questions at the US Congress over data security and user safety. Here at home, junior doctors in England will strike for 4 days between April the 11th and the 15th. The British Medical Association has accused the government of not being serious about resolving the pay dispute and says the Health Secretary has failed to make a credible offer. For his part, Steve Barclay claims the BMA are demanding a 35% pay rise. The union says they won't stop until they're paid what they're worth. Now, the Bank of England has today raised the interest rate for the 11th time in a row as well, from 4% to 4.25%. That's in a bid to slow down the rising cost of living. And it comes after a surprise rise in inflation, as well as a decision last night by the US Federal Reserve to raise its key rate by a similar amount. The central bank's also announced it expects the economy to grow slightly in the second quarter, revising a previous forecast that it may contract. The UK and Welsh governments have announced 2 free ports will be created in Wales for the first time in a bid to boost the country's economy. The Celtic and Anglesey free ports in North Wales are expected to attract almost £5 billion in investment. It's also hoped they'll generate up to 20,000 jobs by the end of the decade. A Nigerian politician has been found guilty of an organ harvesting plot involving a British hospital. Senator Ike Ikwe-Remadu, his wife Beatrice and a doctor were all found guilty of conspiring to arrange the travel of a man to exploit him for his kidney. The victim, a 21-year-old street trader, was brought to the UK last year to provide the organ for the senator's daughter for an £80,000 private transplant. The case, heard at the Old Bailey, was a legal first. The National Education Union has staged a protest calling on the government to urgently reform the inspection system for schools. The union is handing a petition signed by more than 45,000 people to the Department of Education, asking for it to replace Ofsted. It follows the death of the head teacher Ruth Perry, who took her own life waiting for an inspection report which downgraded her Berkshire school to the lowest rating possible. Those are your latest news headlines. I'm back in half an hour. Now back to Patrick.
OK, people. Now, in about 25 minutes, we're hoping to go live to the Albanian PM, who's going to be talking about small boats crisis, illegal migration, criminal gangs, etc. He's been meeting with Rishi Sunak, but just be aware, I want to fit in as much as possible before we go live, so we're going to rattle through this now. We do start, though, with this growing problem of Albanian migrants crossing the Channel. Albanian Prime Minister Edi Rama arrived in Downing Street just over an hour ago for talks with Rishi Sunak. It's believed that illegal migration and organised crime will be at the top of the agenda, but Rama massively stoked the fires this morning. He slammed Suella Braverman, our Home Secretary, said that the comments that she's made are disgraceful. She said, just for a bit of context, that essentially some Albanian criminals are trying to come to this country via the Channel. Rama has today hit back. He said that it was very, very disgraceful moment in British politics, and adding an ethnic seal, and that a few rotten apples did not define a nation. However, figures showed that at least 13,000 Albanians entered Britain on small boats last year alone, which was just under a third of all arrivals. And it comes, as reports predict, that as a result of the government's new illegal migration bill, 150,000 people will be denied asylum over the next 3 years. But, as it stands, we can't deport them. So that means it's going to cost us, you, me, everyone we know, £9 billion over a 3-year period. Unless, of course, we can indeed deport people. To look ahead to a news conference with the Albanian Prime Minister, due to start in a matter of moments, is the Director at the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity. It's Stephen Wolfe. Stephen, thank you very much. Is it just a few rotten apples, or actually are there quite a lot of Albanian criminals here?
Well, it does appear to be more than just a few rotten apples, because we know from our own security services and the police that they recognise that a large number of those coming across the Channel have been either absconding from arrivals, absconding from the detention centres or the hotels, and they're moving into criminal activity. They have stated that in terms of cocaine, now the Albanians are the biggest organisation of criminality in that area, that they've taken over from the Vietnamese the control of the marijuana market, that in terms of the sex crimes and prostitution, they are now one of the leading organisations. And in terms of high-end cars being removed from this country, the Albanian gangs are very firmly in that as well. So it can't be said to be just a few rotten apples. I always think of that as maybe 4 or 5 sitting in your bowl. But when you're talking 12,000 people and thousands being involved in crime, then I think Edi Rama has to really reflect on why are they leaving his country? Why has he not said, what are they fleeing from?
Yeah, and this is a massively important issue, and hopefully when we hear from him, he might address this, because I don't see how he squares this idea of saying Albania is a safe country, and then also, presumably not acknowledging the fact that people are economic migrants coming across the Channel, plenty of whom one would imagine are trying to get involved in some kind of criminal activity. But he's trying to have it both ways, isn't he? I don't quite understand where he stands on this. Why does he say that people are fleeing Albania?
Well, he doesn't. He does say, and we all agree, that there is an Albanian community here that's been here for a long time and that's been added to, and they add and contribute to the country. And I would have thought that they too would feel pretty annoyed, if not ashamed, of those who are involved in the criminal activities from their countries, really destroying their reputation. And I think Eddie Rama should be really supporting those people who've generally come here with proper reasons, applied to come here properly, supporting the economy and working as we do, and get behind people like Suella Braverman, who is making a clear distinction. She's making a clear distinction that she's talking about those criminals who are involved in economic and illegal migration coming across the channel, not those who are legally here working really hard.
Just quickly and finally, Stephen, call me a cynic here, but perhaps Eddie Rama is quite happy to see the backs of these people.
Well, we always look at that case of in Cuba during the 1980s when Fidel Castro freed a whole load of criminals over to the United States and fueled the mass criminality that came out in some great movies that we saw at that particular time. I don't think that he's really in that level, but at the end of the day, he is just not recognizing or accepting that this is mass criminality. And maybe today, after this conference with Rishi Sunak, he will come out and say what we want him to, that they will really deal with illegal migrants, the criminal elements, and support our policies to push them back to his country. And maybe he can then arrest them and put them in prison if they are involved in crime.
Look, absolutely, and we do await to hear from him live on this very show. Stephen, thank you very much. Stephen Wolfe, Director of the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity. What do you reckon the Albanian PM is going to say? Do you think he's going to say that we've done some great deal and we're going to have a return scheme with Albania? I'm quite sceptical of that. But there's another element to the illegal migration as a whole story, which is that some latest figures have shown that if the illegal migration bill goes through, it's expected to go through, what it could mean is that we say no to more people, and that's part of the point, really, isn't it? And if we do say no to more people, it's expected at the current rate that would be around 150,000 people in the next 3 years. Minor point is, as it currently stands, unless something changes, we won't really be able to deport these people or return them, which does mean that we're left, apparently, as a nation with a £9 billion bill for whatever the heck we do with them. Harjap Singh Bangal joins me now, who is an immigration lawyer. Harjap, great stuff. Does this not...
Patrick.
I'm aware that this report was put together by the Refugee Council, which I can't see quite what point they were trying to make, because from where I'm sitting, this just increases the case for deportation, doesn't it?
Yeah, what their point is they're making is why we're going to spend £9 billion on trying to deport people who we can't deport. The fact is, and we've mentioned it before, Patrick, we've only got returns agreements with 6 countries. Albania is one of them, Rwanda, Serbia, India, Pakistan, Nigeria. Well, these are the countries that we've got return agreements with. Now, you can't return an Iraqi person to Nigeria or somebody who comes from Somalia to Rwanda. Even with the Rwanda scheme, and if it does go through, how many places are we realistically looking at there? Currently, it's 200. Even if we get 10,000 a year, that's still not enough to deal with, say, 60, 70,000 who are coming every year. The small boats are 50,000. We're forgetting the ones that actually come via plane and land and claim on asylum, or by lorry. So they're not included in the small boats figures.
No.
So there's no way that we can send back 70,000 people and detain them. We don't even detain that many in the UK. We don't even detain 10,000 in the UK.
But it's interesting, like with all of these figures that are relating to anything immigration related, you can just kind of pick them apart from any angle all at once. So you've got the idea that they have rather unwittingly made the case for deportation by saying, well, if you can't deport them, it's going to cost us a load of money. You could make the case, which is what they're doing, which is to say that why are we spending this amount of money on a policy that we know isn't going to work? I suppose, of course, there is various different bits to this as well, which is along the lines of like, well, what can actually really be done differently? Because they are using these figures on the current rates of people coming across the channel, which if we manage to do the deal with the French that works, and if we manage to actually have some kind of deterrent, i.e. Rwanda, then those numbers would drop. So you could criticise their numbers by saying, oh, well, there won't even be that many coming across.
That's the whole thing. If we look at the history so far, they haven't dropped, they're going up. What you're saying, what can we do differently? It's quite simple. Why don't we give $1 billion to someone to wipe out the gangs? I mean, that'll save us $8 billion. Let's get the gangs. Why don't we pay our armed forces that? and say, here you go, here's a bonus, here's 500 million quid, go out and get these gangs and put them away once for all. We can catch drug dealing gangs. We can catch any other gangs. We can't catch these gangs. And once again, there's no focus on the gangs, Patrick. I just don't understand what's going on.
You will have no idea how much grief I got for merely suggesting that the SAS could be used to their full potential and go out and clobber people smuggling gangs, these criminal people who deal in human misery and human life. I got absolutely slammed for this online. Oh, it's disgraceful what you do. Firstly, I'm talking about the SAS, so it's the actual military. It's not vigilante justice or anything. It's the SAS.
It's an elite unit. It's an elite unit.
It's an elite unit of people whose job it is to do this kind of stuff. And also, we're talking about people who will not just be dealing with human life, they'll probably be dealing in drugs and arms and whatever else as well. So you would think that the cheapest and most effective thing to do would be to employ our military.
Well, you don't have to kill them, right? You can capture them, right? You can capture them. We didn't kill Saddam Hussein. We managed to get him from his stronghold in his country and put him on trial. Why don't you capture these people and put them on trial and lock them up for years? So let's do that. Let's lock them up for life. There's no deterrent to the gangs. The gangs are laughing. The gangs are laughing at this. They're saying, OK, so you're going to pay 9 billion to Rwanda and you're going to lock up all the migrants, yet the gangs are still going to get paid. It's quids in for them. There's no mention of going after the gangs. We should have elite units who go out and get the gangs, and the French should assist us. In fact, all of Europe should assist us, because this is not a problem with just France and Britain. This is a problem that Italy have got as well, Germany have got on that border as well, and perhaps if we have a bit more cooperation, and even Interpol, they should help us in this. No one's going to miss a people smuggler. I don't think I'll miss them, I don't think you'll miss them, and I don't think the people sitting in France or in Europe are going to miss them. So why don't you get the people, and we can lock up drug dealers and catch them? I mean, last week, Lancashire police managed to catch a gang of British drug dealers, 30 of them, and give them 130 years. So if they're successful in catching that, why can't we go out and catch the people smugglers? Just because they're sitting on international waters, OK, there might be some complications on that going into other people's territories. But are any country going to say, right, don't catch these people?
Yeah, there comes a point, and, I think that point is being reached. Look, I'm banging in favour, actually, of trying to give the French a bit of money on the provision they actually do something with it and stop it. I am in favour of the Rwanda scheme and potentially others like it. I am in favour of more border force and all of this stuff. But there is a ginormous, massive, rabid elephant in the room, which is that if you're not actually getting rid of the people smuggling gangs and the people who are doing this, then the whole thing's pointless anyway. But look, Harjap, thank you. I always enjoy our chats. You've wound me up now, Harjap. See, this is what happens. It's Harjap Singh Bangal, who's an immigration lawyer. I could talk all day. Anyway, right, there was more bad news, though, for millions of households today as the Bank of England increased the interest rate for the 11th time in a row. I want to know how this affects you. It can all seem a bit big, this stuff, can't it? Households. It doesn't just affect whether or not you're a buyer or a seller. It's maybe your son or your daughter or whoever looking to get on the property market. Frankly, just the price of goods in general and uncertainty in the economy. And whether or not the Bank of England is actually behaving correctly in all of this. So the rate had been expected to remain at 4%, this is the interest rate. But after yesterday's unexpected rise in inflation, the bank's Monetary Policy Committee voted in favour of raising the interest rate by 0.25%. I am joined now by economist Julian Jessup. Julian, thank you very much. Now, I had another economist earlier on who used to work at the Bank of England and used to be an advisor for the Treasury, and he was saying they've got this all wrong, have they?
Well, I actually would have voted to leave rates on hold today. The key point, of course, the Bank of England is trying to bring inflation down. So it may well have been spooked by the worse than expected numbers we had earlier in the week. But if you look at all the things that tell you where inflation is going to be in 6, 12 or months' time or 2 years' time, they're all heading in the right direction. So, commodity prices are falling, supply chain disruptions are easing, wage growth is starting to slow. So I think they should have been a bit more imaginative, look forward a bit and left rates on hold.
Yeah, because what does this mean for people in the short term? OK, so people who are looking to get on the property ladder right now, say, OK, they might be thinking, well, this is a great time to do it, but I've got to go and get a mortgage. But actually, maybe if they, waited a few months, then they might get a much better rate?
Well, it's important to understand that most people's mortgages don't depend on what the current interest rate is. There are about, I think, 1.4 million people whose mortgage rates are linked effectively to the current interest rate. So they will see their mortgage rates go up. But most mortgage holders or potential house buyers will be on fixed rates that depend on where the markets expect interest rates to be over the life of the loan. So maybe the next 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. And the good news there is actually those market interest rate expectations have actually been falling sharply. So although the Bank of England today has raised interest rates, actually it may well be cheaper next week to get a mortgage than it was a month or so ago. So I think there is some good news there. Indeed, the markets have sort of pretty much ignored the rate increase today and are starting to speculate about when interest rates will actually be cut. That potentially is the big story. Are we close to a peak now? And will the Bank of England be cutting rates by the end of the year?
Look, Julian, I think quite a few people, a bit like myself actually, woke up to this news about the interest rate rises and just couldn't help but wonder if we were in this death spiral heading towards national poverty in a way. You look at your energy bills, you look at, OK, we're sending a lot of money to Ukraine and stuff. A lot of people think that's absolutely fair enough. We've got now people out on strike left, right and centre, interest rates going up, the cost of living just in general. When you walk into Tesco's, it always feels a lot more expensive. So can our economists and our people at the Bank of England and Mr Hunt not be a bit more creative and imaginative and get us out of this?
Well, I've got some sympathy with that. I thought today's announcement from the Bank of England was sort of boringly predictable. It's the orthodox thing to do. I had exactly the same reaction to last week's budget from the Chancellor as well. Sort of, technocratically sound, clever, all that sort of stuff. But it doesn't really move the dial on the economy or most people's lives. So I do understand the frustration that people have with whether it's the Bank of England or the Treasury. That said, I think there are some reasons to be a bit more optimistic about the future. As I say, there are good reasons to think that inflation will plummet over the rest of the year. The economy has been holding up better than people expected. The labour market is still performing well. So yes, wages aren't keeping pace with inflation, but it's relatively easy to get a job or keep a job if you want to. So I think there are some reasons for optimism. And I'm hopeful now that we are actually at the peak for UK interest rates. And it won't be too long before we can start talking about cuts.
OK, well, good stuff. Thank you very much, Julian. Always an absolute pleasure. My good man, Julian Jessup there, who is, of course, an economist, whizzing you through the latest economic news. Be weird if he didn't, wouldn't it, really, given that job title? But remember, a little bit later this hour, we are going to hear live from the Albanian Prime Minister, Edi Rama. Little bit of context, he's been meeting with Rishi Sunak. He's absolutely slated Suella Braverman. He's saying, hey, how dare you say that Albanian criminals are crossing the channel? He's making it sound like all Albanians are criminals. Well, to be fair, Eddie, she didn't quite say that, and also, unfortunately, there are some figures which would appear to back her up. Is he going to try and help us tackle the migrant crisis, though? Yes or no? What do you think we're about to hear from the Albanian PM? GB Views at gbnews.uk. I'm Patrick Christys, and this is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere. Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
OK, welcome back, everybody. Now, in just a few moments, we are going to hear live from the Albanian Prime Minister, Edi Rama, and hopefully he's going to tell us how he's going to help the UK tackle the migrant crisis. But it, of course, remains to be seen. He was incredibly bullish in his rhetoric earlier on, pretty much slating Suella Braverman for daring to say that some people crossing the Channel were indeed Albanian criminals. But should we get rid of Ofsted? Different topic. The National Education Union has handed over a petition to the government calling for the school grading body to be replaced. The petition has been signed by more than 45,000 people, and schools are also removing logos and references to Ofsted ratings from their websites. Look, we all know, I don't really need to tell you, do I? Ofsted grades schools, doesn't say outstanding to needs improvement, whatever. It comes after head teacher Ruth Perry sadly took her own life whilst waiting for a report which she feared would be negative. With me now is Lord Ralph Lucas, who's Conservative peer and an education commentator. Lord Ralph, thank you very much. And again, I just want to say, whilst we all acknowledge completely how tragic it is that a lady took her own life, and supposedly that was down to the fact that she was desperately concerned about this Ofsted report that was going to be negative, I just wonder whether or not now Ofsted needs to be scrapped as a whole, because what's the alternative? Unfortunately, part of running a school is that you need to be graded on performance, don't you?
You do need to be looked at on performance. And before, Ofsted was awful. And Ofsted in its time, as you know, I think I would give it quite high marks, particularly over the last few years. I think the tragic circumstances of Ruth's suicide and the fact that the chief inspector is retiring give us opportunity to, I hope, take an independent look at how Ofsted is done, to give it an inspection,
right, okay,
and to decide how we could do better.
So talk me through it. So from where I'm sitting, part of me goes, well, actually, I think teachers were allowed in some ways, people would dispute this, to kind of mark their own homework when it came to some grades that were dished out during the pandemic. Then we've seen them on strikes and wanting pay rises, and now they're saying that they don't want to be inspected, really. And I could be forgiven maybe for thinking that perhaps they just don't want the grief. Am I being far too simplistic and unfair here?
I think you're being unfair, but I think all institutions need to be inspected. You need an outside eye on how things are doing. You know, we need to inspect children's services and hospitals and schools. Without it, and I've been looking at education for 30 years, I can remember before Ofsted, you just got schools that were going nowhere and really failing the kids who went to them, and nobody was caring, and that won't do. I don't want to go back there.
Is Ofsted a little bit like the school's mafia, though? Do you get a knock on the door one day and it's a flipping heck Ofsteder here, put those books away and get the nice colours on the wall and you better actually teach them well today? I mean, how does it work? Is it quite a brutal assessment?
I think it is. I think we could do things to make it more constructive, more supportive, soft. I mean, to have a system of support in there alongside Ofsted, so that it wasn't just once in 5 years and a shock and really quite devastating experience if things aren't going right. To have something where you are being marked every year and you know what you need to do to improve, but this gets checked every few years. But so look, that you don't get surprises, you get a chance to do better.
I can't help but wonder, though, arguably more so than ever, parents, I think, are increasingly concerned about the things that their children are being exposed to at school, whether or not it's a certain type of ideology, especially when it comes to things like sex education classes. You know, a variety of different things, you know, unconscious race or critical race theory or whatever it is. You know, and I think now more than ever, parents want the reassurance of knowing that someone's going to go in and hold that school to account. And can I just put this out there as well? I think whilst there are a huge amount of parents who are very sympathetic towards teachers, etc., I think there's also a lot of scepticism from a lot of parents about the quality of education that their children are getting. And I think, is it not right for parents to know that someone can just turn up at a school one day and rip it to shreds inside out and know how well your child is being taught?
I'm more optimistic than you are about the state of our education system. We're at 80% of schools good or outstanding. Things since John Major's day through the Blair years and on have been on a good upwards trend, and state education is in a relatively good state at the moment. But yes, you're right. Always one needs to be careful about what's happening. Some of the things that have been going on in sex education are completely out of court. And we need a system that picks up on those things and supports parents in doing that.
OK, all right, look, thank you very, very much. That's Lord Ralph Lucas there, his education commentator, just bringing us bang up to date. It's more than that, of course, Conservative peer as well, Lord Ralph Lucas. There we go. He's reacting to the news that Ofsted is absolutely copying it, schools are removing it from their websites, etc. Apparently it is, of course, even schools that are rated good and outstanding. So it's kind of a mass thing against Ofsted here. Look, I'm just going to delve into the inbox quickly because very short... Oh, I believe we're going to go live now to the Albanian Prime Minister who's talking about the migrant crisis.
In the number, it appears, in the number of young men trying to get to the UK. And I would like you just to explain to people what might have been driving that and what your way is of seeing that.
We have seen it also previously. There was a rise in the numbers suddenly, like big boom during the big refugee crisis in 2015, and a lot of people took the way to go to Germany. Then some years later, it has been a rise in the direction of France. And this was a third rise in my count that happened through the channel. So it's a combination of factors, and of course the base and what connects all these rises has to do with spread of the voice and of the narrative that a new frontier is opened with opportunities, with jobs, with possibilities to engage in different sectors and so on. And when it comes to Britain, this is also connected with a very family-based and very, let's say, area-based ties. Typically, these are Albanians that come from the northeast of the country, where the ties are and the bonds among families, among neighbors, are strong. On the other hand, there is a lot of confusion, and there is also a lot of speculation about the data, because it's simply not true that all these people come from Albania. This is theoretically impossible, arithmetically impossible, and factually not true. They are Albanians that come also from other countries, mainly Greece.
You mean they've been living in Greece for some time, and now they're moving to the UK?
Because of the fact that this region, in communist time, when nobody could move, and when everyone, even within Albania, nobody could move, counted a little bit more than 50,000. So, counting now all the movements from this region to to inside the country. A lot of them moved towards the capital, towards the bigger cities, counting how much they moved from from the country outside, and then adding 12,000 in a year is simply impossible. So it's a combination of factors.
So this figure of 12,000 in 2022 through small boats, you're saying this figure is not right,
No,
coming from Albania?
Yeah.
Coming directly from Albania. And this amazing figure hang over it all from Eurostat, that this was 1% of Albania's working age men heading this way.
What does it mean? I don't understand.
Yeah.
These are speculations of all sorts. The thing is that there is a clear understanding that Britain is in trouble, and in Britain there are a lot of opportunities, there are a lot of demands for workforce, and there are new avenues for hopes and dreams of these people. And this is simple and clear, and all this then is,
And one of the points we were discussing before was construction.
Also, you have to understand that these rises were at that time connected with the same, let's say, fundamental push, which is the opportunity to have access in the political asylum system. When Germany changed this basis by declaring Albania safe origin country, meaning to get political asylum, it's not something that it's normal, it's completely something out of the norm. Then the move went towards France, and now with the safe origin change in Britain, this is changing just in its basis.
One of the interesting things we were discussing just before this conversation was that people some people coming from Albania here because of construction, and there aren't construction workers as many since Brexit, but also that the government here has changed the rules to allow legal migration for things like construction. And it seems to me, is it part of the argument you have been making to Parliament and the Prime Minister?
It is not for me.
Legal
it is not
migration.
for me to make. But I simply don't understand at all this policy of closed borders, of fighting against people that come and so on, because it's something that it's going against the economic basic needs, and I don't see how Brits and British youngsters will do the jobs that are done by others, Albanians included. But this is not for me to
No, but I'm wondering whether you're expecting now more legal migration because routes are opening for that.
This is something that is up to the British government. What I see and what we live with in Albania and in the region is that it's a very, very, very ruthless competition among even very developed countries, Germany first and foremost, to suck our human capital, because everywhere the need for more workforce is more and more alarming, while the demographics go down and while the industries need workforce. And so we are facing something that is going to be more and more dramatic in terms of human capital. This is very clear.
I was going to ask you.
OK, all right, so that is the Albanian Prime Minister Edi Rama there. Now, he is speaking about, of course, the migrant crisis and the issue when it comes to Albanians involved in that migrant crisis. He was previously very bullish, slamming Suella Braverman, our Home Secretary, saying that it was completely disgraceful and borderline criminal rhetoric for her to say that criminals from Albania are coming over here. He there, I think, was taking quite an interesting standpoint. I'm joined in the studio now by international security and border control expert Henry Bolton. And Henry, you're kind of double relevant here because you actually know that guy, don't you, Eddie?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. I was I spent a total of 9 months in Albania, 3 months as advisor to the Albanian Prime Minister, and then I returned as senior advisor to the Secretary-General of the OSCE, who people might know from its work in Ukraine, monitoring the conflict there. And in that role, I met with Edi Rama on a number of occasions. He was the mayor of Tirana at that time.
Yeah. So do you think he really believes the rhetoric that he's pumping out here, which is that actually, you know, Albania is both simultaneously a safe country where no one really needs to seek asylum from, but also that it isn't criminal elements of it that are involved in coming over the channel?
Well, I think, you know, if we, first of all, if I may, look at his comments regarding Suella Braverman and her comments. It was very bullish, as you said earlier, very hard line on it, that it was unacceptable language. He has got a very difficult constituency that he's got to speak to in Albania. They're a proud nation. They stand very, very much on the principle of honour. And that, in fact, that's some of the problem, one of the reasons why Albanian organised criminals have been so effective, because there is this bond of honour and there's blood feuds and so on going on amongst them and so on. It makes them very, very dangerous, but also he's got to bear that in mind too. He said in what we saw just now, or he referred to Albanians from other parts of the region, and he's entirely correct, and it's one of the things I've tried to get across. In the figures that we've seen, 12,400 or so Albanians come across on small boats, I'm quite convinced that a very significant proportion of them, I won't necessarily say the majority, have come from Kosovo or the Republic of Northern Macedonia. And the hotbed of ethnic Albanian organised crime is indeed Kosovo and the north of Albania. And yes, the Albanian government has to carry some of the blame for this, because they automatically grant passports, Albanian passports, to citizens of the Republic of Kosovo who are ethnic Albanians. So there's a sort of brotherhood, should we call it that? So it's very difficult for us here to distinguish between the two. One of the things that we have singularly failed to do as a nation, and as the Home Office and the Immigration Service, in my view, going back 20 years or so, has been to be interested in the fact that there is a difference in terms of where these people come from, and that's important when you're trying to address the origin, and B, actually doing anything about it. We've treated them all as Albanians, and I have a degree of sympathy with Edi Rama on that. They're not all citizens of the Republic of Albania. They are Albanians from other parts of the region, particularly Kosovo. And, you know, I think Eddie, in this respect, you know, he's upset, but I think we will find that he's a very cooperative person. When I was working with him, he was very cooperative.
But with respect, how do we cooperate with him? Because if I was him right now, I would probably be saying what he said there, which is, hey, look, come on, not everybody coming over from Albania is indeed actually from Albania or a criminal, which, all right, OK, fine. But then if we say to him, all right, well, do you want to take a load more of these people back? And it turns out that quite a few of them have got criminal issues or have been involved in organised crime, presumably he's going to say no. So what does cooperation look like with the Albanians?
Well, I think, first of all, we've got to wake up to the fact that it's not the Republic of Albania only that we've got to deal with here. It is also the Republic of Kosovo and the Republic of Northern Macedonia. He mentioned Greece, but I think that was a bit of a get-out. He didn't want to mention the other two, because he would get bad politics back in Albania as a result of that. There are a lot of people, powerful people in Albania, who are very much linked with Kosovo and with the Republic of North Macedonia. So he's got to be quite careful. But his message there, I think, and maybe in private to the Prime Minister, was deal with Kosovo, deal with the Republic of Northern Macedonia, and us. We can't solve this in the region on our own. And you need to be putting pressure on others, not just ourselves. I don't think, having spoken to Edi Rama in the past and had discussions with him about organised crime, I don't believe that he doesn't get it. He knows perfectly well how endemic organised crime is amongst the Albanian, the mafia shqiptare, as they call themselves.
But also, we look at numbers, Henry, to be fair, and apparently it's costing the British taxpayer £57 million a year to keep Albanians at Her Majesty's pleasure in this country.
Well, add to that the cost for the National Health Service and others treating and dealing with the massive cocaine, and particularly cocaine, and heroin influx we've got here. It's all imported across our borders, and the Albanians basically control that trade now. And they have that's been they've been moving into that position for the last 2 decades. And
and it's not an easy trade to control, which also implies something in itself.
Well, they can be incredibly. People have seen the film Taken. I think a lot of people watching us now have seen the film Taken. It is an exaggeration, but in character, it's not far from the situation that does occur in certain parts of the world, including Albania. Albanian organised crime is vicious, nasty, ruthless, and tied together by this honour bond, if you like. So it makes it very difficult to deal with.
Look, Henry, thank you very much. As ever, Henry Bolton there, who is a border control and security expert and has had massive amounts of experience in Albania. And just before that, you were, of course, listening to the Albanian Prime Minister, who is visiting Britain at the moment, Edi Rama, who was... well, a little bit evasive, you could say, when it comes to the Albanian channel migrant problem. But we're moving on from that now, and we're going to talk about the trial of Thomas Cashman, who is charged with the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell, and that trial continued today. So Cashman is accused of shooting Olivia and injuring her mother after chasing a drug dealer into their home. He denies all of the charges against him. Our GB News North West reporter Sophie Reaper has been across this case from the very start and is outside Manchester Crown Court for us now. Sophie, what's the latest, please?
Well, this afternoon, Thomas Cashman continued to face cross-examination as the prosecution questioned him about the events after the shooting, which took place in August of last year. Now, the court was shown a still of the gunman firing at Joseph Nee. David McLaughlin, KC, asked the defendant, "Is that man Thomas Cashman?" To which he replied, "No, it is not Thomas Cashman." The court was then shown a still of the gunman running away from the scene, and once again David McLaughlin questioned the defendant about the identity of the figure. He said, "Is it you?" Mr. Cashman answered, "No, it is not me." The topic then moved on to the clothing, which the prosecution alleges Thomas Cashman changed into after the shooting. Now, the defendant denies this, saying that he'd borrowed the clothing, tracksuit bottoms and a T-shirt, weeks before the incident had taken place. Now, either way, this clothing was later recovered from Mr. Cashman's sister's house in a pram box. And after analysis by a forensic specialist, gunpowder residue was found in the tracksuit bottoms. When he was asked about this, Mr. Cashman said he didn't know how that had gotten there. A little bit later, though, during re-examination by the defence, Mr. Cashman was handed the T-shirt that was also recovered. Now, the prosecution alleges that this T-shirt would have been bloodied as the gunman made his escape by jumping over garden fences. But when Mr. Cashman was handed the T-shirt and asked if he could see any blood, he said no. It was then handed to the judge, Her Right Honourable Justice Yip, and then presented in front of the jury as part of the evidence. Now, court has concluded for the day with the end of Mr. Cashman's evidence, but it's due to resume once again here in Manchester tomorrow afternoon.
Sophie, thank you very, very much. That's Sophie Reaper there, who's our North West reporter outside Manchester Crown Court. And as Sophie was saying there, we'll keep you up to date with the latest on this trial. Just want to emphasise as well, so this Thomas Cashman has been charged with murder, attempted murder, wounding with intent and possessing a firearm with intent to endanger life, and he denies all of those charges. OK, all right, so we're moving on from that now because Rishi Sunak's UK tax returns have been published, showing that he's paid more than £1 million in UK tax since 2019. Well, this afternoon, it's been revealed that Sir Keir Starmer has paid, and in comparison quite puny actually, £67,000 to HMRC in the last financial year. But it's quite a bizarre situation, isn't it? Because apparently now being really wanted in politics is a bad thing. You can't possibly be financially successful in politics. Are you too rich to rule? And you end up with a rather unusual situation where two men are arguing over who has the smaller package. Anyway, is our Prime Minister too minted to be in touch with ordinary people? Joining me now is political commentator Stephen Carlson-Woods and the Deputy Leader of UKIP, Rebecca Jane. Fantastic. OK, it's ladies first, always. So, Rebecca, I'll start with you. Is Rishi too rich to rule?
He is, yes, absolutely. How on earth can a man of his wealth understand the struggles of real people? You know, he is a perfect example, actually, of how our tax system benefits the rich and penalises the poor. Let's not forget that his household is worth 730 million, and he is actually paying the same tax rate as a nurse on £40,000. How on earth could that be ever appropriate? I'll never understand. So my issue with this is that he's never going to, he can't be impartial because of the sheer wealth that he actually has. He is the man at the top of the tree, and if we were to look at the taxing system, and even if it was the right thing for the country, and I'm not saying it is or it isn't, but if it was the right thing for the country to have more tax for the more wealthy, a turkey's not going to vote for Christmas, and in that case, we have Rishi Sunak, who is the absolute turkey of the United Kingdom.
All right, well, Stephen, I'll bring you in now. Stephen Carlton-Woods, who is a political commentator. Some people will say, to be honest with you, I couldn't give a stuff how rich Rishi is. I just wanted to do a good job as leader. Do you think his bank balance matters?
Not at all, no. And this is the sort of rhetoric that we get from the Labour Party, by the way, about the rich not being in touch with the population. You want the very best of people to be running the country. And it's irrelevant the amount of money it is worth. And I just think that you've got to have people that can do the job. We look across the other side of the house to Her Majesty's opposition, and it's full of people there that can't do the job. And we're at real danger of having them doing the job come the end of the next general election.
Stephen, I'll stick with you and then I'll give Rebecca the final word. But there are question marks as to why on earth Rishi Sunak is paying, from what I can gather anyway, a lower rate of tax than just ordinary people who, you know, certainly aren't worth millions. I mean, he's paying a lower rate of tax than plenty of people I know, for goodness sake. And he's got I mean, he's got enough money to, well, he had enough money apparently to sort the old National Grid out to heat his own swimming pool. That's quite a lot of cash. Why is he paying the same tax rate as a nurse?
Right. Well, I mean, at the end of the day, he's paid over £1 million worth of tax in the last 3 years. Starmer's paid a pittance in comparison to that. And he's contributing massively to the country through his tax. You know, if I was him, I wouldn't want to be doing that sort of job. I'd be enjoying the money I have rather than being scrutinised for it all the time. So, you know, I don't think that really comes into it for this.
OK. Rebecca, I will put that point to you, actually. If I was worth... I don't mind saying this, I think it's pretty obvious. If I was worth 700 million quid, I'd be absolutely nowhere near Downing Street. I'd be in the Maldives, I'd be plastered all over the Vegas Strip. I'd be doing whatever I possibly could to just spend as much money as I could and have as good a time as I possibly could. Does he not deserve some respect for being worth that amount of money and still trying to run a country?
I like the idea of where you're going there, but no, because for me, it's not... You know, I entered into politics in September, October last year. The first thing that I learned is it's all about ego and status and power. It's not actually about the money. And that's, you know, it should be about people. But no, Rishi Sunak's in this for his position, and he's getting exactly what he wants. But for me, it's completely insulting for him to remotely even stand there and say, I understand the struggles of the lower paying tax rates and people obviously that are incredibly hardworking and who are struggling every single day. He will never, ever, ever understand it, and to say anything else is completely insulting. We do want people running this country who are obviously wealthy, but this is a man that is completely and utterly out of touch with reality and can't do the job properly.
Go on, Stephen, final quick one.
Overlooked. The amount of money he gives away to charity every year as well, millions of pounds, and that doesn't come on the radar with the mainstream media. So take that into account as well, besides the tax he pays.
All right, well, look, both of you, I enjoyed that. That's a good debate. With Stephen Carlton-Woods there, who is, of course, a political commentator, and the Deputy Leader of UKIP, Rebecca Jane. Right, look, ladies and gents, it has popped off in the inbox, as it always does. Thank you very much, everyone who always gets in touch. I absolutely love to hear directly from you. GBViews at GBNews.uk. People saying here, John's been on, so it absolutely doesn't bother him how wealthy Rishi is or otherwise. And people don't seem to care too much, I suppose. They just want him to be good at the job. There is also a lot of reaction to the fact that the Albanian Prime Minister was giving a conference there, a conversation there, A lot of people saying he's completely out of touch, and they think that he needs to do a bit more to try to keep people in Albania not crossing the channel, and maybe needs to wake up to the idea, like Bernadette does, that there are indeed Albanian criminals who are crossing the channel. Michelle joins me in the studio now. Michelle Dewberry, Wood Jubes & Co. You're right.
I'm absolutely fine, thank you. How are you?
All right,
I was rushing by the seat of my pants to get in here tonight. I've got to say, I was having some good, interesting conversations out there, and I was looking at my watch going, oh, gosh, look at that.
What, and now you've had to come and slum it here with me? Sorry to drag you away from your mates.
No, it's not. It's not. And then I've just bumped into my two panellists on the way in, so a little natter with them as well, yes. Kevin Craig and Daniel Moylan, like those two.
Yes.
Lots to get into tonight, isn't there? And there's some random stuff I want to get into as well, because I can't help but notice, right, that we are being charged so much more for stuff now, services, and receiving so much less in return. So, for example, council tax. This is a right bugbear of mine. They've all shoved their council tax up to the maximum, and in some cases way beyond. And now they've started issuing these random things like, right, everyone, we're really excited to introduce our new subscription service. So now, if you want your green bin collected, you can join this subscription and pay you 50 quid a year and get your bin picked up. What?
Sorry, it's not a basic... You know, I went on to try to pay my council tax the other day, and the website was down, right? Then I tried calling up, there was nobody there, couldn't get through to them at all. Then, after this went on for days, by the way, and then I get a letter in the post saying that they were about to fine me or potentially take me to court for not paying my council tax. So, well, I couldn't.
You see, there's the whole council tax robbery, and don't even get me started on potholes, by the way.
Oh, I've done that.
Because what are you doing with your council tax? Anyway, so I want to get into the whole why are we okay with it? Because it's not just councils, it's businesses doing it as well, hiking their prices while offering a really poor service. And then, of course, I want to get into a lot of the newsy stuff as well. But that council tax thing just annoyed me.
No, that'll get people going, though, because I think people don't feel like they're getting any bang for their buck from the local council a lot of the time as well. And certainly in the case of, I believe it was South Gloucestershire, that council came out and said that it would take them more than 700 years to fill in all the potholes.
Well, don't even get me started on the likes of Croydon, who've had to say that they're bankrupt. Yes.
Yeah.
Anyway, one of my guests is a local councillor, so I can't wait to hear what he says to it all.
Good stuff. Right, OK, well, I can't wait for that. I will be glued to it in the office. That was Michelle Dewberry. She will be coming up with Jubes & Co. very, very shortly. Thank you very much, everybody who's been tuning in, who's been listening on the radio, who's been watching online, whatever you've been doing. I've been Patrick Christys. I will be back again tomorrow at 3 p.m. Peace out, people.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails,